Well, hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good Gazoon it's the Nocturnal Tracks podcast doing our annual summer review with Mr. David Bond. How are you doing, sir?
Good evening, folks. Yeah, good. This is flown round, but yeah, here we go again.
Yeah, it isn't it weird how like the major releases for the summer tends to happen earlier on. Like we do these like sort of part one and twos because like summer seems to be getting bigger, but later season there's like maybe one or two big films and that's
The
about
second
it.
half is well, you think in the first half we had two Marvel films. I mean, we've got one Marvel-ish film this time, but we'll come to that. The first half was a bit more. I'd forget quality, just size. I think the bigger films were in
Yeah,
the first half, but
yeah.
there you go. That's the way it goes. July and August are becoming ever increasingly barren now. It used to be May. The end of May was quite big. June took a slight dip, and then July was amazing. But
Yeah,
there you
July
go.
was the month, wasn't it? And then
Yeah,
you had like maybe the first week in August for the last major release,
yeah.
and
Whereas
then
August this time, yeah. Well, yeah. I suppose you had Hobbs and Shaw, but
yeah,
nothing.
because Hobbs and Shaw came out as the same time where you would normally have like the Dark Knight or Inception would have come out, or
That's right.
the big Nolan release, or whatever the big it was Mission Impossible last year, wasn't it? So
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's getting more front loaded though. For all of that, that there is no denying the fact that when you look at the two lists, we've got as many films to cover this time.
mm,
Actually, a few more because there's things we haven't both seen. But this isn't quality, just overall, I think they were slightly bigger in the first half.
mm.
But there you go.
I think my my biases tend to sort of just ignore kids' films as well, like films like sort of Toy Story. Even though that is like a major film, my mind just goes like, oh, I just don't
Well,
think
that's
of it.
that's one for the kiddies during their
Yeah,
holiday,
yeah, but it shouldn't really been dismissed because it was like a major release and
and
did
it did
just as
well.
yeah, you know,
But
uh,
Marvel start early.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I can't even quite remember what we covered last time, but I don't know, maybe a bit more mixed. I'd certainly, if you pick the two or three you're really looking forward to, there's more chance they're in the first half and the second half. But
yeah.
it's only slightly trending that way, but it's getting more pronounced with each year.
So, but it's stretching out. I mean, you had like big major release September and then October, then for Christmas knocking around the corner, isn't it? And there's always like a big November release.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's all year round. I mean, we've got. I'm trying to think. Let me have a look. There's a few things coming in the next couple of months. They're maybe not quite as big, but I mean, there's a Joker film next month.
yeah,
It's R rated and it's not as mainstream, but that's still a comic book film.
yeah. There's quite a few.
And
I
then
mean,
obviously,
you've got It Chapter Two coming up soon.
which is big. I mean, it's not necessarily white mainstream in that not everyone can see it, but I mean, it's fairly big. And even things like Ad Astra, they've got huge budgets, as does
Mm,
Gemini Man.
yeah,
So certainly there's money being thrown at things the year round. There's a Terminator film in October. Now, it's not been the most reliable franchise in the last few years, but you can't deny that's still a big film. There's a Shaun the Sheep film in October as well, which is bizarre. But there you go, because it doesn't even line up with half term. But that's fine. Maleficent's got its sequel mid October. The first one did hundreds of millions.
I'm
Uh,
sure there's something else other than like Joker in October. Because
October,
last year had Venom, didn't you?
yes. I'm looking now. I can see Joker, Gemini Man, Terminator Dark Fate, Shaun the Sheep, Zombieland, Double Tap, Maleficent. But
See, I
all of
forget
those,
about Zombieland.
yeah. Um,
Frozen Two is coming as well. It's coming out later
Frozen
on.
2 somewhere. It's not on the list I'm looking at, but the list I'm looking at is based on the website I write
Mm.
for. Because obviously we've got behind the scenes sort of staging areas where we claim things and submit things and all the rest of it. And I'm literally looking at the claim sheet and I can't see it.
Uh,
But
Adam's Family movie.
it says, oh, yes, yes, I see that. That's CG. That feels a little niche, but then it's Sausage Party directors. That could be interesting in tone. All
Could
right.
be.
That's quite interesting. But yeah, November you've got a Ford. Well, it's known as Ford versus Ferrari in the United States, but it's Le Mans '66 here. James Mangold film about Le Mans. You've got the Charlie's Angels reboot. You've got the Ryan Johnson Knives Out film.
Hmm.
It's all year round. I mean, the biggest things are like, well, maybe March to June now with a bit of a reprise in August, but definitely. I mean, and you got the Downton Abbey film, Chris.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. I've no interest in seeing that.
Do you know what made me smile about I'm not going to look down my nose at Downton Abbey at all.
No,
But
no,
what
well,
made
I've not seen a single episode, so I can't be.
oh I saw a few seasons of it. A few years in, it was like well established when I caught up with it sometime. And it's okay if you take it on its terms, but from like season 4 maybe onwards, it just
Yeah.
becomes it really does become a soap opera and definitely dips in quality. Dan Stevens is in about the first 3 years of it. But what made me smile about the Downton Abbey trailer is they normally have companies to cut these trailers. There's a handful of them that do it. But it's cut like any other trailer. So you think of films where there's action and like the hero suffers a reverse about halfway through
Yeah.
and it's a triumphant comeback. Well, they've cut the Downton Abbey trailer like that. But the plot of the film is basically the king and queen are coming to visit. So trying to make like a tense, trailer out of that is quite difficult. Um, the main thing about Downton Abbey, and I don't knock this at all, is it's comfortable, easy, comforting watching for a lot of people. And that was literally the words my mother used. So I'm not looking down my nose at it at all.
Yeah.
But to try and cut like an action trailer out of it is a bit of a tough ask.
I remember someone saying on Twitter, like when the trailer first came out, was like, if it doesn't have, what's the name? Is it Maggie Smith?
Yeah.
If it films like not about like sort of terrorists taking over, Maggie Smith is like as if take matters
It's
into their own
basically
hands.
John McClane. Yeah.
I'm not interested. I was like, oh yeah,
The trailer is they find out the Queen, King and Queen. We've had a Queen so long in this country that we just think of the default monarch as the Queen, but it's the King and Queen are coming to visit, and they're all tense and excited about it. And then like the Queen's valet or whatever, or basically the King and Queen staff. When I say Queen, I mean King and Queen interchangeably. Actually, the reigning monarch was the King at the time, but we'll go with it. And the King's staff turns up and basically tries to like boss the Downton Abbey staff and take over. And then they sort of get together and decide they're not going to fucking take it anymore. And they fight back and presumably make a triumph of the event.
and the
And,
returning butler comes out of retirement because
and they're trying to make that sound and feel like it's tense and a bit actiony. I'm not locking it. I'm just saying that I'm not sure it works with the most traditional way you cut trailers. But, Doctor Sleep is probably the other one because
yeah.
that's a Shining sequel with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Which...
So yeah, that Doctor Sleep. That's a bit of a funny one really because that's gonna be like the sequel to The Shining, the book, while also being the sequel to The Shining, the film, where the two things don't match at all. You know, the things happen in that quite important things that happen in that film that happen in the book, which the film is being made of, that don't correspond with both versions of The Shining. So
I'm lost.
yeah, because Kubrick did a completely different take. I think there's a character who isn't dead in it. Things like that. So I'd be interested to see how that turns out because they're definitely using echoes of The Shining,
Yeah.
the film.
Oh, I've seen a couple of screenshots from it, and you just go, "That's The Shining. That is taking
Yeah.
the iconography of the film." So yeah, I'm likely to go and see it, but it's not up the top of my sort of most wanted list. I have to say. But
It is Mike Flanagan though, so he's generally consistent, because consistently decent anyway. When it comes to horror.
okay, I don't know that I know his stuff too well.
He did. He did that. Well, he did that. House and Haunted. Is it House and Haunted? I don't know.
House on Haunted Hill is a 1999 film. It must be something similar. I doubt it's literally that.
No, he did a. It was a remake of it. He did a series on Netflix.
Okay.
He did a couple on Netflix. There's a film called Hush, which is basically him, which is basically about a deaf girl being stalked by a killer. The Gerald's Game, that's another Stephen King thing. That's on Netflix, or at least it was.
I've heard of that. Okay.
What's the name of the? Yeah, The Haunting of Hill House. There you are.
Right, I knew it was something different. I knew it was subtly different from what we knew, if you know what I mean. Okay.
So let's get the review started then, shall we? So before last time you saw Godzilla and I hadn't.
Right.
I've now seen Godzilla.
Right.
And I think I kind of agree with you largely. Give us a recap what you thought of that.
Right, what did I think? Anyone who's literally just listened to part one to prep for this will probably prove me wrong, because I haven't thought about what I think for nearly 3 months. But as I recall, I thought it was more entertaining than the 2014 film. There was more action. The action was... I say the action was good. The action was muddy a lot of the time. But when you could see what was going on, it was pretty decent. I thought the character work was odd. You had Carl Chandler doing his Clint Eastwood impression for the first 10 minutes. And there was an awful propensity for people to be facing something, turn 180 degrees and speechify to the room about things they couldn't possibly know. So they would tell you what Godzilla's worldwide pattern was, which they had absolutely no way of knowing. But it was all right. I think the one thing I was sort of almost apologising for last time was that I'm not that knowledgeable on Godzilla. You know what I mean? I don't know how long he's meant to be in each film, because it's always my perception he's never around very much. It was okay. I thought the character work was poor. And the one thing I was wrong on was I genuinely thought I'd remember it better than the Gareth Edwards film. Well, I do. But given it was 3 months ago, that's not that impressive.
It starts to challenge you.
It's starting to go already.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to remember it too much. I mean, it was quite a pleasant surprise to have the Vera Mariga character to be like the surprise baddie, even though it was a sympathetic baddie. But it was like, oh, okay, well, that's something a bit different.
I called her Kid Leslie Crusher, didn't I? Because I am pissed off with it. We've just on the main show we've just discussed RoboCop 3, which will be out after this actually, because we'll put this show live as soon as it's ready, really. But RoboCop 2, from the time of recordings, like not going to come out for about a week and a half. And Chris particularly was just talking about how kids in films are always characterized as wiser than the adults and perfectly cute but wise, basically. They're always beloved of all the adults. They always know better than all the adults around them. They save the day. And every time they open their mouth, what comes out is a lot wiser than their years. And the kid in this was very, very... Again, it felt a little bit by committee, just because Stranger Things is big. Mm-hmm. So it had that sort of... We talk about it with 80s and 90s, or 70s to 90s, Eon particularly, with the Bond series, where everything feels a bit, what's hot right now? And I felt that a little bit with this. I don't know about you.
Maybe not committee in that sense, though. That's not to say, you're not wrong at all. It could easily be that way. I just never thought of it. But yeah, I thought it was very action heavy. I thought the visuals were good from when I could see them.
When you could see them.
Yeah. I it had some striking. You can see the design work, when they did the artist's impression of the idea of what the shot's going to be or what the visual's going to be, And you kind of see that, and you think, yes, that looks really nice, but everything's so soaked in smoke and rain and everything. It's just a lot going on the screen and everything's a little bit too shaky cam, that you just get a little bit bombarded with everything, so it all kind of like just washes over you, rather than if you go, wow, my God. And, you know, there was a little bit too much cities getting destroyed kind of thing going on, which I suppose is to be expected.
We've talked about this before, haven't we? Where we talk about a bigger death toll must mean it means more. And similarly, if you destroying 24 cities must be more exciting than destroying one. And it doesn't work like that. I don't have any bad memories of the film. It was okay, but it's fading again. And I'm still, bear in mind I haven't seen a lot of the 1950s film, but I'm still yet to see a Godzilla film that's excited me, really. Always go in hoping for the best, but I always come out like, I was a bit bored there.
Yeah, wasn't there a recent Godzilla from Japan, haven't they? They've done a new Godzilla film, haven't they? Or they rebooted it themselves.
Right. I do feel I've got to watch one of those, because the Western ones have been nothing special at all.
You know, and I haven't seen it, so I am just literally going off like what I've been told and what I've heard. I think it's called Shin Godzilla or Godzilla or something like that. But it's like they've kind of like rebooted it themselves. But yeah, okay. I'm not familiar with Godzilla either. So, but I thought it was absolutely fine. Could have been better. Could have been a lot worse.
I mean, the thing with the 2014 one is it prick teased us a bit. It had a director who was like highly regarded as an up and comer. Bryan Cranston was still massive news because it was only a few months after Breaking Bad had finished, and then it slowly sort of pulled the rug from under us, and I was just so bored. And I'm aware you don't get a lot of Godzillas in these things, but that doesn't make it right. The whole point that, like, traditionally you only get 7 or 8 minutes of Godzilla, and it's like, well, traditionally it's shit then. Because traditionally, why would I want to watch 2 hours plus of a film to get 8 minutes? That's nonsense. It's like The Dark Knight Rises, where Batman was a fucking rumour in that film. You know, I think he might have appeared.
Well, he just spent a lot of time sulking in this cave, pining over Rachel!
I don't want to knock what people enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
But the defence, well, there's never a lot of Godzilla in it, is like, well, that's not really much of a defence, is it?
No, but it depends on, like, the rest of the film, you know, what the other characters doing, what are they saying, you know, it wouldn't matter so much if...
In and of itself, it doesn't do much for me. But there you go. I didn't dislike it, and actually, in principle, not much Godzilla, fine. But when I found the film boring, as the 2014 was, and you go, well, it's great that they held Godzilla back. No, it wasn't. Nothing happened through most of the film. This one's a little bit better. They still hold Godzilla back a bit, and I quite like that, but there were other things going on, so I was never bored by it.
Yeah.
I thought character work was a bit poor.
They kind of did the Rocky 3 thing with Godzilla, didn't they? Of him getting, like, beaten first round, you know, he has to, like, sort of come back and...
Yeah. It's because he was training in a ballroom and posing for selfies with female admirers.
Yes.
I'm not sure it's exactly the same as Free, but that's roughly it.
Yeah, and then he had to get, like, you know, Carl Weathers in to...
Carl Weathers came in, trained him up. Had him swimming. He was a rubbish swimmer with those little hands. And he tried to blow fire and it would just blow bubbles in the water. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was okay. Sounds like you loved it much more than I did, to be honest with you, but there you go.
Yeah, it was fine. I mean, again, I am struggling to remember much of it.
I was waiting for it to settle, because when we recorded last time, I think I'd seen it the day before. So I was like, well, next time I'll have thought about it a bit more. I'm giving it another thought. And I just think as many creatures as you can put on the screen, the better. So, you know, if it's Godzilla versus King Kong, great, bring it on. But I don't find these creatures inherently that exciting. They're just...
No.
No.
Just monster mashing it.
Yeah.
But we got Godzilla versus Kong next, so
Yeah, I think that's out in March. Middle of summer.
yeah. So what's next then? What we got? So we got. Was there
Oh,
anything else we need that I've not seen that we need
there's a
to pick up?
few. We'll try and go through them fairly quickly. One's quite a big one. I was surprised you didn't get around to see it. Toy Story 4.
Yeah, I was meaning to, just never got around to it. It was one of those things. Chances are I'll probably end up watching it later on this week, but there you are. But yeah, Toy Story 4. What do you make of it?
Um, like you, I didn't want a Toy Story 4. I just think sometimes you have to I was reading some page, I think it was an Office page on Facebook, about The Office. Or I don't know, may have been something else, may have been Twitter. I can't remember. But there were people strongly arguing the American Office is better than the UK one. And I think, and of course, Americans often say, well, that British one that was cancelled after one series, not understanding how long our how long our series are and all that sort of thing. And the fact that here, they don't always disappear into a machine. Sometimes the creator just can pull the plug and just say, that's fine, I've done my dozen episodes. Like Fawlty Towers was never cancelled. That's not what happened. He did a series and literally, or a season as you would think of it, American listeners. And a year later, 4 years later, he did another one. Simple as that. Two runs of 6, done. Almost every episode perfect. There's one or two Fawlty Towers episodes I don't think are as good as the rest, but they're generally very, very good. And The Office was the same. But I'm not arguing the rights if you were to say at their absolute peak, like pick the best season, best half a dozen episodes, best story arcs, whatever, maybe the American one is better. I don't know. But there's something about knowing when to fucking stop is the point I'm trying to make. And The Office, the UK Office, is perfect because it did everything it wanted to do. Whereas the American one, they ran it into the fucking ground. And the main man left after like 3 seasons from the end and things like that, and rehashing stories, and then having like Jim and Pam married. It's like that's defeating half the object of the show. I don't mean to knock that show. It's just the idea of like knowing when to stop. And Toy Story has that problem, I'm afraid. That Toy Story 4 is perfectly good, but I don't want perfectly good from Pixar's marquee property. Toy Story was the film that started them. Toy Story 2 is still, if for my money, one of the finest sequels ever made. Toy Story 3 is not as good as Toy Story 2, but people forget that because the ending's so good. They forget it's a bit baggy in the middle and things like that, but the ending of Toy Story 3 is perfect. And I'll never forget, on a personal note, I went to watch it with my dying father. And I'm there watching, this story about the passage of time, and only a couple of times in my life have I ever cried that hard about something that isn't directly my everyday life. I mean, I've split up with people and things like that and cried and stuff, but in terms of going to watch a film, I've really had an experience like it. So what they've brought back is perfectly fine, but it's redundant as fuck. On the plus side, they've taken it into a new environment. They've made it more of a road trip, and they've tried to do something different with it. It's not like those 1990s direct-to-video, Lion King 2 kind of, more on Lion King later, but, those Jungle Book 2 and all that kind of thing, where they were just direct-to-video in the same environment with some not quite as good songs and like the next day kind of storyline. Well, this time they're married or whatever. They've tried to do something fresh with it. And I sit and look at it, and dispassionately, it's as good as most Pixar films. The storyline works. It has emotional beats in it. The action sequences are great. They're kinetic. They're nowhere near as good as The Incredibles' last two. I think that's actually part of my problem. Last year, The Incredibles was this really superb kinetic action film. And at the start of the year, you had Coco, which was this just wonderfully emotional film. And Toy Story 4 rather is not as good on either of those counts. So for me, and I'll allow somebody a star more than this, but it's a 3-star film. Someone wants to argue it's a 4. Yeah, all right. It was a high end 3. I could have given it a 4. But like, if Toy Story 4 is not absolutely 5-star over all the way, don't do it. It's like doing a sequel to Up. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
why the fuck would you do that? Money's the obvious answer. I know but artistically, why would you do that? There's no excuse for this. And at the end of the film, they try and like pull some emotional heartstrings because, spoiler alert, there is a sort of emotional parting of the ways for like Buzz and Woody, and it just doesn't work because you're trying to like they had hardly any time together in the film. Buzz is a wasted character anyway. They hardly use it. I mean, I remember the guy who played Mr. Potato Head, Don Rickles, died.
Yeah.
And I remember reading they've managed to assemble enough outtakes and things he said in previous films to assemble a performance. He's got one line. Mr. Pricklepants, Timothy Dalton, has one line. The characters are fucking wasted. And it becomes Woody's story, and it's okay, but like, you finished a trilogy perfectly. Toy Story 3 wasn't the strongest. Toy Story 2 was the strongest. Again, these are all my opinion. I'm happy to be argued with on any of them. But like, don't bring back a series just to make it arguably 4-star when you've done 3 5-star films. So this film pissed me off.
But yet made you cry at the same time.
No, I didn't cry at this one.
Did you not? Oh, okay.
I cried at Toy Story 3 at the end. But no, this didn't make me cry at all. They really tried at the end. You could see them almost like, it was almost like Disney had run into the cinema and tried like chopping some, onions in front of me. And then like showed me photos of dead pets of mine. And then like pulled on my pubic hair or something. They were trying everything to elicit tears from the audience. Doesn't really work. Now, it's okay. No Pixar film is particularly worthless, with the exception of The Good Dinosaur, which is shite. But
I've not seen that.
They've tried to start. It's terrible, but they introduced new characters like Duke Caboon, Keanu, and that new character's really good, and the sort of new villain, quote unquote, is good, and the new environment.
Is it Little Bo Peep? Spoiler alert.
No.
Is it?
No, she's not. She's not a villain.
Okay.
And they brought her back. So, on some regards, it's actually as inventive as like a 4th entry is ever going to be. But like I say, I shouldn't be sat there arguing in my own mind whether it's a 3 or 4-star film. This is Toy Story. You created one of the few perfect trilogies, and you've just shat on it. You've shat on it with quite a good film, but that's not good enough. Good is not good enough.
With Sporky or whatever his name is.
Oh, that character's fucking shit. Don't like it at all. But there you go.
Is it too cutesy?
Yeah. It's just all right. And I believe in the artistic integrity of the film because they tried to do something else.
Yeah.
You've had something else where they were in the bedroom most of the time of their owner, or they could have done it as a prequel with Andy, or even Andy's, parents, or, father or something. There's a number of things they could have done which just would have been lazy. And this film isn't lazy. But like I say, they took a risk, and for me, that risk did not pay off.
It wasn't worth it.
No.
Would you rather have seen like a completely different story with different set of characters, but set in that same world?
I think they should leave well alone. I think they've got certain properties I think would almost suit serialization. I think you could do more Incredibles films.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would hurt. I don't think you would damage the artistic integrity of the first one. But Toy Story is so much about a journey through life, and has, emotional beats and a point each time out. So it's not the series you try to stretch.
So did this film try to have a point, or did it have a point, or what, or did it?
It seems to be about finding yourself. It seems to be about finding your own way, because Woody has been about Andy all the time, and at the start of the film he's about Bonnie because Bonnie's his new owner, and it is seemingly only months after the first or after the third film. So although we're 9 years on, it's probably 2 or 3 months later. And it does seem to be about that Woody actually needs to find that there's time. It's his time. It's his time to like make a life for himself. And finding Bo Peep is about that because she got thrown out between the events of 2 and 3 because she's not in 3, and she's actually found a life for herself, and it's about Woody committing to that because Bonnie doesn't really want him. It's not that she doesn't want him; he's just not a favourite toy of hers, and she's got other things that she's interested in, and other animals, no animals, sorry, other toys and so on, and so he's he's in the cupboard most of the time, and he's not taken to school with her and things like that. He has to sort of hop into her bag to get there to look after her. So he's trying to look after somebody for whom he's not one of her favourites anyway. So I get all of that. There is a point, and I can see that people might be moved by this. But I just think if this couldn't happen because the original 3 feed into this. But had this been an original property to the same standard, you'd be going, that was a really good Pixar film. But it's following those films. And Toy Story 2 for me is still top 3 in the entire Pixar canon. And I would dare say Toy Story 3 is probably top 6. I wouldn't know without looking. But that's the sort of quality they're following. And what they've brought out, I think the most damning thing I can say is, and this isn't that negative because of what it's following, but it's not as good as either of Pixar's films from last year. In this country, Coco and The Incredibles 2 were both released in 2018. Toy Story 4 doesn't touch either of them. Well, if you were to pick 3 random films in the Pixar canon, and one of them's Toy Story, the chances of Toy Story being, or a Toy Story film, the chances of the Toy Story film being the weakest of the 3 is negligible. And yet, of the last 3, that's where we are.
What was the last Pixar film?
Incredibles 2 was the last
Incredibles 2,
Pixar
yeah.
film.
Yeah. But yeah, I get what you mean by that. That'll working if you do more sequels to that, because that in itself is a little bit more. This time on The Incredible, I mean, you can do like a TV show of it, really, couldn't you?
Yeah, you absolutely could, and you could do it a number of ways. You could freeze it in the 60s, and then you've got effectively Pixar's version of like a Bond franchise, where you've just got, but everything is always peak Sean Connery. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to deal with it moving into the 70s and the fashions are shit and shit, it's Roger Moore. You don't have to deal with that, or you can actually see them through life, and you can actually see the kids become teenagers, and Bob end up with like longer, shaggier hair, and suddenly it's like glam. You know what I mean? I don't think it's actually the 60s, is it? I think it's present day with the 60s aesthetic, but you can still do something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, but Coco as a one-off was just almost perfect as well. And like I say, we shouldn't be sat here looking at the last 3 Pixar films, and a Toy Story film is the weakest of the 3. It isn't weak, not objectively speaking. Objectively speaking, if I was to look at, I actually, because of Did You Expect Us to Talk, I do, and we're going to do Pixar. We haven't got it scheduled, but Pixar is happening one day, and I do have a ranking somewhere, just as like, for when we start. Yeah, Toy Story 4's not in the top half. It's not far inside the bottom half, but it's in the bottom half. And that's the most damning thing I can say. You look at the top of their canon and it's Up, and Toy Story 2, and Coco, and Monsters, Inc., and Toy Story 3. And for me, I prefer The Incredibles 2, but I dare say most people would stick The Incredibles up there. Finding Nemo, that sort of thing. Towards the bottom of the top 10, you've probably got things like Inside Out.
Well, even like Finding Nemo 2 as well. That was a.
That's one of the few I've not seen. I've not seen Finding Dory yet.
Oh yeah, Finding. In fact, I just called it Finding Nemo 2. Yeah. Finding. Yeah, I think it's a similar sort of thing to that, really, where it's just. Yeah, there's nothing actually wrong with it, but other than the fact that you made it.
I'm being harder on it because it's Toy Story. If it was any
Yeah.
other Pixar film, with the possible exception of like trying to do something stupid like an Up sequel or a Coco sequel, pick one of their emotional films and let's try that. To me, I mean, Monsters Inc. is still probably one of the better Pixar films. Monsters University certainly isn't. The drop in quality is not that steep. Toy Story 4 on its own merits is a pretty good film, and you've only got to look at its Rotten Tomatoes score. It's about 97% or something. All the critics loved it. And actually, if I was on Rotten Tomatoes, I'd be positive as well, because 3 stars is a recommend just. But it's the faintest of recommends. But my biggest problem with this film is they made it. That's my biggest problem, and they would have had to go some to make it worthwhile. But I have to say, I thought that about Toy Story 3, and they pulled that off all right.
Mm.
So it's not like, well, you were never going to accept a sequel. I did. But yeah, this one is nothing better than all right. I'm sounding tougher on it than I mean to be, but shame on them for making this. And I don't normally feel that way because I'm aware it's a business and you get remakes and sequels and squeezing the life out of things. But Pixar is a varied property. It's a varied series of properties. They've got away without making one for 9 years, right? So it's not like they're reliant on Toy Story. And last year they made 2 of their most lauded films in like a decade. And so to follow that, well, I suppose that film wasn't out to be lauded when they started Toy Story, but you get my point. That like they're in rare form at the moment. And they've gone 9 years without a Toy Story film. So it's hardly like, well, they needed to, or it makes commercial sense. Well, yeah, it does make commercial sense, but it's not like they didn't have other films that were doing really, really well as well. But mainly it's the fact that I sat with a dying man and cried at the end of Toy Story 3, and they've just sullied that memory, so fuck them.
Oh, I don't know. But I think 3 is like usually like the golden number, really, for when it comes to sequels. I think you stick to 3, like the trilogy.
I don't have any strong opinions on it. Like I say, this will be a bit of a surprise to people who've heard a lot of me, because like I'm always defending the right to like remake, sequelize, reboot, squeeze the life out of, because it's just a business. I don't give a fuck if they remake the fucking Matrix or whatever. Actually, I'd rather have a reboot than a bloody sequel, talking to the Matrix, but there you go. But Toy Story is, I think, partly because it's part of a child's life. It's part of people's childhoods. Partly because they capped it so perfectly. Very few films have ever ended that well. And partly because they've had 9 years of other properties, some of which have done exceptional amounts of money. They've done Cars sequels. They've done Incredibles sequel. This is the first Pixar film to go to a 4th entry. Well, partly that's because Toy Story was the first, so it was always likely to get there first. But it was like, of all the ones to like squeeze to a 4th and like bleed dry, you did it with that one. And if you said to anyone, name a Pixar film, there's an 8 out of 10 chance they'd say Toy Story. You know what I mean? It's a marquee product. I gave this 3 stars, and like I say, I nearly gave it 4, but like 4 stars is not good enough. This would have had to be almost perfect to justify its existence.
Yeah, I think it had to be. The thing with Toy Story is it had something to say about growing up, didn't it? I don't know what this one says has any connections to the other 3 in terms of that.
Not really, because it's more about the toys themselves, because they've exhausted the sort of child's story. It is what it is. It was not as bad as I'm suggesting. It's actually a good film on its merits, but good is not good enough for this. It is a bit like Godfather 3. Godfather 3 is not as bad as its reputation, but like you follow 2 perfect films with like that. And I think a lot of the kicking the Godfather films gets is because it's not Godfather or Godfather Part 2.
Yeah.
It's not actually as bad as all that. And I think this is a bit like that. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, I can think of other examples. They're quite often a fluff trilogy when I think about it. But, we'll talk about Men in Black sequels later, and you just go, what did you do that for? This is better than all of those things I just named. But, no, sorry, but that's it. But yeah, we've talked about Toy Story a lot enough because we've got loads to go through. I'll just go on to the next couple because there are two more I haven't seen.
Okay.
The next one is Yesterday. I went to see the Danny Boyle film Yesterday.
Yeah, that was written by Richard Curtis, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I've talked about this on Do You Expect Us to Talk episode. Now, we're quite happy there may be people just subscribing to this feed, or people who just listen to us a couple of times a year, or people who didn't like that episode. I can't remember what one I discussed it on. Was it Living Daylights? I can't remember. It was all commentary we did. It was either
Yeah, it would have been
Mission
Living Daylights.
or The Living Daylights.
I'm pretty sure.
And I effectively ended up reviewing the film during that show. Richard Curtis is in decline. And I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of when you're the age he is and you've had the track record he has. Everything he does now feels incredibly pandering. It feels like him mimicking his best years and doing a rinse and repeat. So Richard Curtis will often do films where the leading person, normally a man, has a load of friends that are a little bit posh, but he's been friends with them for years, probably since childhood, certainly since university. This film, tick, it has that. A lot of the sort of sources of humour, he's very fond of people over dancing. We said this at the end of our Notting Hill review commentary we did one Christmas, where Hugh Grant turns up at looking for Marty McCutcheon, fucking weirdest match in the world, but there you go.
Rocky EastEnders.
Yeah, just no way would those two be into each other, but there you go. And they think he's a carol singer, so he starts singing, but it's something like King Wenceslas or something like that, and the kids are dancing like it's a fucking disco. He's very fond of that as a line of humour, but he's also increasingly become about grand themes I don't think he's that interested in. So About Time was about time travel, but all right, it's just a device, but why sign up for something built around a concept you're not that into? What was the time travel device in About Time? Go into a cupboard, clench your fist.
Well, the thing about Time is, though, that just felt like a film that Richard Curtis went, oh, I've got an idea. What can I do with that? Well, that's an idea. That's an idea. That's an idea. And then that was the script.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most frustrating things about the film, other than the fact that, and probably because of that's how he went about it, the lead character came across as a right bellend. And that
he made me appreciate Hugh Grant, because Hugh Grant would have played that 20 years before.
Yeah.
And he would have done a better job with it. There's not much wrong with that leading man, and most of the problems in the writing, but he's got way more screen presence and likability, frankly.
Yeah, I think it was just mostly in how he treated things, and it would have been just down to direction. But it was just
well, that's the thing. Richard Curtis is definitely not a fucking director. But you look at the stuff he's done in recent years, and they've just become gimmicky. I mean, 4 Weddings and a Funeral was a slice of life. All right, there was a central gimmick there, in as much as let's do almost everything through 4 weddings and 1 funeral. But it was a slice of life, not our life, posher people, very different demographic from me or you, but recognisable people. Some hackneyed jokes in it, because, it's a bit like when you watch Only Fools and Horses. You've only got to watch about 3 or 4... This isn't Richard Curtis, by the way, but I'm just picking another writer. You won't go through more than 3 or 4 episodes until somebody goes to eat something while somebody mentions a bodily function, and then they freeze with the food at their mouth and ooh, that's put me right off. Jokes, just certain writers gravitate to certain jokes, and Richard Curtis is just becoming very repetitive, and I think he's becoming more populist, and I don't mean populist in the Donald Trump sense of the term. I mean he's stopped going for his audience and just started going for the audience, all of it. So he does a film about pirate radio, and at the end of that film I wasn't convinced he had any interest in that era or that music at all. I felt like he'd picked up the charts for the weeks around the film and just played those records, and I never got any sense of his love for it. About Time, I thought, pissed away its concept, although it does have one of the most moving moments I've ever seen, but the film itself's not very good. And then we come on to this film, and it's like, let's do a film about the Beatles. And it's like, I thought I would at least get a sense of his love for the Beatles. What he actually gave us was a film that was just trying to convince us we love the Beatles, all of us, under every circumstance, and they're the greatest thing ever. And also, it was like the best of the Beatles. It was like, pick the dozen Beatles songs you can think of off the top of your head, and they're all in there. And not much else, because and there's no differentiation between their early stuff and their later stuff. There's no sense of musicians on a journey. It is purely great, this, isn't it? Because we're British and we all love the Beatles. If the Beatles appeared now, we'd never heard of them. Everything, with the lazy exception of Oasis. I mean, what a lazy 25-year-old joke that is. Oasis are a Beatles copy. That's a mid-90s joke. And I'm not sure how accurate it is. Funnily enough, whenever I listen to Oasis, I hear Lennon's solo stuff, not the Beatles. But there you go. If you go and buy like a compilation of Lennon, like,
It's also like rips off other bands as well. There's like Clapton and things like that.
even a bit of Slade in there and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
But all right, let's just buy that. That's the funniest fucking joke in the world. So take Oasis away, and everything else musically still exists, but the Beatles never did, which wouldn't happen because obviously they influenced some stuff. If the Beatles came along now, would there be an absolutely universal 100% agreement across the population that this is the greatest music of all time? Well, no, because the world moves on and things build on other things. You know, it's like watching. It would be like watching like the 1966 World Cup football final and thinking that's where football peaked. Well, it didn't. You know, people got fitter and built on like tactics and methods. You know, it's like assuming Pele must be the greatest footballer of all time. He probably isn't now. He probably isn't, because we've had decades of like sports science and coaching and stuff like that. But even if he was,
the game's played differently now, isn't it? So even from that point of view, if you put like George Best in like with them, it'd be like shit. They don't have to deal with the football because it's still lighter. You know what I mean?
People will still assume George Best is the greatest footballer of all time. There's probably 20 to 30 hours of him on video, full stop. Whereas everything a footballer does from the age of 17 is on film now. He might be, but it's at least debatable, and that's the same with the Beatles. So I just thought it was this lazy fucking pandering bullshit. I will say the lead was good, Nimish Patel, and he actually had some chemistry with Lily James, and I think Lily James is great. And it looked nice, and it was sweet, and it was quite funny. The script was the worst bit. I mean, you got Danny Boyle doing a flat-out comedy, which he probably hasn't done for a while. A Life Less Ordinary, I suppose, was a comedy. And, you know, Trainspotting in that's funny, but if you're talking out-and-out comedy. But the weakest thing is the script. Richard Curtis, this man wrote Blackadder. You know what I mean? And he wrote Four Weddings, and he wrote Notting Hill, which have proven over time to be classics. But he's got ever more sentimental. He's got ever more lazy. And his films look like rinse and repeats with a little bit more diversity in a slightly different environment. He's got nothing. The man has nothing left to say. And I've got the greatest of respect for him because his track record's so good. But it's been over 15 years since he wrote anything worth anything. And the between him and Boyle, they're tone deaf. They actually brought an aged John Lennon back. And I just thought that was one of the most tone-deaf things I've ever seen in cinema. They know it's divisive. They know not everyone would like it. I thought it was offensive on a number of levels. Firstly, it releases from any sense of guilt on the main man because he's effectively stealing music. But because he meets an elderly Lennon and that man lived a happy life, it's almost like, well, I might have stolen his music, but the whole fact this has happened is he's lived a normal life. He's been happy. He's enjoyed himself. He didn't get gunned down at 40, so all's well. It does that thing that I'm not going to repeat because I talked about it on the podcast, but I do have problems with painting Lennon as some kind of sage. I spoke probably a little bit harshly on there. Actually, I agree with everything I said, but there was no need maybe to couch it in the terms I did. But even if you think Lennon was a perfectly nice, talented human being, the idea he was some font of all wisdom is kind of laughable. And Nimish Patel does go to him for like life advice. I really, I gave it a 3-star review, which is not reflected in anything I'm saying here, because it's a Richard Curtis film. It's likable. It makes you smile. It's got a warmth. There's some sort of, I'm going to sound like a wanker now, but almost emotional truth in the central relationship. But it's spectacular. Not only is the comedy not that funny, not only is the central premise something this out of touch guy is getting less and less connected to his premises. He just seems to go, yeah, that'll be an interesting concept, but you're not that interested in the concept. He's wildly out of touch. You know, they'd play some Beatles music and someone would go, not Coldplay, is it? When were Coldplay at their peak? You know what I mean? You're a decade behind on your references, a decade and a half behind on your references. And some of it's misjudged. Bringing Lennon in was misjudged. And also, in any romantic comedy, there's a bit in the film where the couple need to work out they're meant to be a couple. So it's not really a spoiler, because if you've ever seen a romantic comedy, they're always the same. They go through a period where they're not destined to be together until they are destined to be together. And the way he behaves when he works out they're destined to be together is a massive invasion of her privacy and a little bit embarrassing. Like I say, I'm making it sound worse than it is. It's got a nice soundtrack, obviously.
Beatles.
Well, I mean, even if you're not the biggest Beatles fan in the world, you'll recognise everything, and it's far from offensive. It's nicely shot, nice leading people, few smiles in it, very nice. But this is a man terminally in decline as an artistic force now, and I'd go as far as to say, if this is what Danny Boyle's capable of now, Eon got a fucking lucky escape.
Yeah, meh. I mean, why do you think with Danny Boyle, think it was just a bit lackluster? Like,
it's like a high budget TV film. There's no inspiration in it. There's just no inspiration in it. Is
it kind of similar to his film that he did called Millions?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was kind of like a little bit more of a...
Millions is a better film, though.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it's a bit twee in places, and I'm thinking, if that's your sense of humour, how are you going to cope with like Bond's cheekiness and quips and that sort of thing? Are you going to produce the cheesiest Bond film since Roger Moore was in the role? No, that's probably not fair, because Danny Boyle is different every time. He is one of the most malleable directors I've ever experienced. But I have to say, now bear in mind, I gave this a 3-star review. I am not saying he's a terrible filmmaker, but we're looking at somebody who started off with Shallow Grave and Train Spotting, and even his less lauded stuff. I quite liked A Life Less Ordinary and The Beach. Then he did 28 Days Later. Mid-career, he did Sunshine and Slumdog Millionaire, both really, really interesting films. And then he's gone, in the last 4, he's done Trance and this. He's still very, very... I'm just looking at him, and I'm looking at his age, and he's 62. And that's not old in life, but we're talking about someone who's been creative for a number of years. And then I look at Richard Curtis's age, and he's 62 as well. And actually, I think you've probably both just said everything you've got to say. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when they say, let's bring back Blackadder, fucking no, leave it.
Well, I remember like Bill Nye when I think it probably was like talking about time was it was telling a story. It was like just on like walking with Rich Curtis like on set or like during filming, and they were just like reminiscing. It's like he just seems to be a lot more interested talking about films and stories rather than making them. So that's probably why he hasn't directed anything now.
I just think right. If you think of like Notting Hill or something, yeah.
Yeah.
If he pointed a camera at that set, forget their ages. Even if you picked Hugh Grant now and that lot now, and just wrote some stuff and like pointed a camera at them, it would be a lot more entertaining than these silly gimmicks he's not committed to. Because pirate radio was almost like it had no point beyond, remember that?
Yeah.
And most of the audience fucking don't, because it was 40 years before the film was released. So unless you're like 50 or over, no is the answer to that. So it was all, wasn't that amazing? Well, if you're of a terminally fucking nostalgic bent, and I mean the type of people, and this is more of the population than it should be, who look at things as always better in the past, then maybe you'll get something out of that. But frankly, what was pirate radio? Really, really poor quality sounding radio because of like where they were and stuff like that, illegal and everything. You know, you're a bit misplaced getting that nostalgic about it. But if you are going to get that nostalgic about it, show us why it was great.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the Beatles. It's not enough. All right, if you're going to introduce it to the widest possible audience, have a stab at explaining to me why the Beatles were not only great, but like timeless. Just putting the needle down on the vinyl and going, look, listen.
Yeah.
All right, what's that telling me? But I think most of all, it's just every humorous tick he's got, I've heard before. Every line of joke I've ever heard before. The way he structures his films, I've seen before. And we are now 3 or 4 films in a row that I can think of where he's signed up to a premise that I don't actually think he's that interested in. And if you're going to do a film about the Beatles, show me something different. Show me it coming back and it not being received the same way. Show me people trying to do strange things with it. Don't just show me the world loves this, don't we?
Yeah.
It's like, I tell you what it's like. It's like a feature-length version of... Do you remember when we did the Love Actually commentary?
Yeah.
And there was a bit where I think they were watching Ant and Dec or something. And I said...
Ant or Dec, yeah.
That was quite a funny little joke. But not only that, Bill Nighy could make shit sound brilliant.
Yeah.
So, I tell you what, he's the one actor I can think of that like would land every Bond quip we've ever had. Even the bad ones. He'd be like, well, global warming is... terrible thing. And you'd be like, that's brilliant, Bill. What a great line. Right? But I said to you during that commentary, I said, the problem with Richard Curtis, I didn't say it in these words, but the point I was trying to make was, Richard Curtis comes from the perspective that we speak as a nation with one voice. So we all love the Beatles. We all watch Ant and Dec. We all like buy the Christmas #1. We all listen to the same radio stations. We're living a kind of shared experience with shared, and as society fragments, that's less and less the case. I haven't watched anything Ant or Dec have done in like fucking 20 years, at least. I mean, I'm not saying I've never walked in somewhere and it's been on the TV, but like they're not my thing. Their TV is not my thing. So this idea we've all seen it is not true. This idea everyone loves the Beatles, I can name at least 4 or 5 people I know who would projectile vomit at the fucking sound of Paul McCartney's voice. Now, they are popular, they are legendary. When people use terms like overrated to describe the Beatles, they've missed the fucking point. They are everything they're painted on as in context of their history, but they wouldn't be now because they've influenced getting on for 60 years of music.
Well, it's but that's the debate, and that'll be the interesting thing if the film tackled that.
No, he's not interested. His whole point is good, isn't it?
I mean, I'm not seeing it obviously because obviously I'll be my point of view, but it's from seeing the trailer or looking at concept, I honestly imagine in the last act or the last verse, like, it somehow reverts, and then everyone finds out that he's been, he's got an A for himself for, basically plagiarizing the Beatles or something like that. I imagine, I mean, it just strikes me as an obvious plot point. Obviously, it's going to revert back, and then
he's going to have to sort of learn his lesson at some point.
Yeah, and so it sounds like they don't do that at all. So I imagine
They
that's
do and they don't. Well, for anyone listening who hasn't seen it, spoiler alert, I will say, he admits it on stage at Wembley. Ed Sheeran's playing Wembley. He asks if he can go on stage. He goes on and like admits it all, and admits his love for the Lily James character, who he's got like a hidden camera on, which is fucking disgusting as a whole concept. It's just
as she goes to a shit and shit.
well, I mean, she's not backstage going, I'll have a little fumble. I mean, she is just stood there. But it's just not the point. She's got no idea 80,000 people are fucking looking at her. So I didn't like any of that. But he admits it. And what makes me laugh is he said, I didn't write these songs. You know, they were written by 4 men called Paul, John, George, and Ringo. And no one questions this? No one goes, well, who the fuck are they then?
Yeah.
Okay, then who do we pay royalties to? He puts them all out on the internet for free, which is something you can do with one sort of like swish of the keyboard. And that's it. And he goes back to being like a teacher, which is what she does and stuff. It's kind of... the funny thing is, if it came on, I'd happily watch it again. Music's all very nice. It's all stuff I recognise. He's very nice. She's lovely. It's all very pleasant. I don't think Richard Curtis is capable of doing unpleasant stuff, but it's getting broader. It's getting a little bit dumber each time. And I'm sorry, the man's past it.
Yeah.
To the point that I'd rather he didn't work anymore. I mean, I'm not one of those, to be fair. Keep releasing stuff, Richard, if it makes you happy, because I don't have to go and see it, do I? But the thing is, because you used to be so good, I probably will end up going to see it. And I think I've just got probably another decade of these types of disappointments in me.
Like if they do another Blackadder, well, you're definitely going to see it, but you're probably going to hate yourself.
Well, it's Toy Story again.
Yeah.
I reiterate, 3-star review in both cases. I'm talking like it's a disaster. What it is 5-star creatives producing 3-star work. And it's like, well, I'd rather you didn't.
Yeah. Okay, so what else have you seen that
just the one more, Good Boys.
Oh yeah. That's a recent one, isn't it?
Yeah, Good Boys came out weekend before last. We'll release this quite quickly, so it'll be less than 2 weeks since we saw Good Boys, probably, by the time this comes out. It's kind of... It's funny what nostalgia does to you. In that, I think if we were to think about those films like Superbad, Knocked Up, Judd Apatow, basically, they were probably at their peak in the noughties, you know? From around the time of Anchorman and Dodgeball onwards, really. Probably through about, I don't know. It was starting to get tired by stuff like I Love You Man came along and stuff like that. But there was about a 4 or 5 year period in the noughties where they were really popular. And they kind of disappeared up their own arse. And I don't mean that in a pretentious way, but I just mean they got longer and longer. So by the time of something like This Is 40, they were like coming in at 2.25 hours. Knocked Up was something like 2:10. And the whole joke, I remember watching The Pineapple Express, and the whole joke was they're a bit stoned. And I'm thinking, if that's your central joke, Cheech and Chong did it better 30 years before.
It was like, what if we did an action comedy but with 2 stoners?
Yeah, but that's a 5-minute sketch.
Yeah.
That's a 5-minute sketch. It's not a film. And I think...
They're thinking of 5-minute sketches. I could watch a feature-length version of the Playboys.
Having said that, if you wanted to, mind you, I would happily... They could stretch that out as long as they want. In fact, I'd say, Chris, capital idea. I would love...
Bang on!
I'd love it now because they're all a bit too old as well.
Yeah.
I'd love it now with like him trying to get into the leather catsuit and shit like that.
And of course he's like, hitting on like sort of whoever the new current...
For those of us who don't listen to our normal show, go and look up Harry Enfield, The Playboys. We've referenced it. In our whole history, we've referenced it about 3 times. But enough that like it's associated with us referencing it. But and it was a little comedy sketch, but it was like 3 or 4 minutes at the end of an episode of his show, where suddenly it was like an early 70s Persuaders, Jason King style secret agent Playboy kind of show, right? but really bad effects, really badly written, really cheesy, all the leading men sex obsessed and all that kind of stuff. And it was really funny. But it's a 5-minute sketch. The Pineapple Express was like a 2-hour film. That's not to knock that era, actually. I think they were all pretty good. But what I'm saying is something like Good Boys comes along. And I remember seeing it's kind of Superbad, but with 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
Superbad is nowhere near as funny as you remember.
Yeah, because most of the leads are bellends.
Yeah, most of the leads are bellends, and frankly, the only funny joke is there's 2 funny jokes in it. One's gross out, and one's just so incongruous as to be funny. I think he got period blood on his leg or something like that. At one point, that was kind of funny, if gross. But the only other funny joke in the film is McLovin. But the very fact that he's called McLovin when he looks like he looks is kind of funny because it's incongruous. But that's one joke, and it was in the trailer. It's not a bad film. But what I'm saying is Good Boys comes along and you think, it's 12-year-olds, this ain't going to be funny. If it is funny, it's going to be a warmed-over rehash of what we got a decade before. And all that. And actually, Good Boys is better than almost any of the films I've just mentioned. It's what I really, really like about it is that I thought the whole sense of humour was going to be out of the mouth of babes. So it was going to be a feature-length version of the kids saying asshole in, like, Meet the Fockers. Do you know? Where like, the whole joke is a kid saying that naughty word. Actually, this is a bit more knowing than that, because they're 6th graders. And I think America... See, we start school in the year we turn 5. You start in America the year you already have turned 5. So I get confused on the ages. But 6th grade strikes me as the year you would turn 12 over there. It's the year you turn 11 over here. So you've got these guys who are like 12. The plot is really difficult to sell because it's literally they want to get some kissing tips because they're off to a party that's going to have kissing in it. So they nick their father's drone and fly it over the neighbours to see if they can see next door's girl kissing. They think it might be kissing another girl, but it might be kissing her boyfriend. They're not sure what. And they basically capture the drone, and the whole outcome of this, if they don't fix this, is one of them's going to be grounded. That's all it is. That's the whole thing.
That's wonderfully small stakes.
It's wonderfully small stakes, but you forget that because it's such a big deal to them. But the humour's hilarious. I mean, their mothers must have been in on this to, like, allow them to do all this. I mean, at one point, you don't actually see what they're watching, so obviously the actors wouldn't have. But they're watching porn. But they're watching porn to get kissing tips. There's not a lot of kissing in most porn. I would imagine, having never seen any, of course. Excuse me. And that's actually the central point of the humour to this. It's the point that they half understand what they're talking about. So at one point, I think very early in the film, they're discussing how to give a woman a blowjob. And it's like, you've heard all the terms. You're sort of aware it's vaguely oral, but you've got the detail wrong. Yeah. There's a bit where they think they're going to be attacked, so they steal all of like one of their parents' weapons, but they're all sex toys. And they just don't know, so they're waving dildos around and shit like that. There's yet another bit. The girl he's... Sorry, I've just got to finish this point. The girl he was desperate to kiss, he goes to give her a necklace. But it's like anal beads. And of course, the girl doesn't know what they are either. But they've been used. So you can just see she can smell something a bit unpleasant. Dialogue is really, really funny. I mean, at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, they're on a sex swing in like mother's bedroom, but they've got no idea. They just think they enjoy playing. You know what I mean? They go to watch porn, and of course, and they're talking about it afterwards, and they're going, "We wanted kissing tips," and you know, they just ended up licking each other's asses and stuff like that.
I have to see this now.
And the three of them are all really different. I'm repeating some of my written review here, but the central boy, Jacob Tremblay, who I think is in what's Jacob Tremblay in? What he was in Wonder under a load of makeup. He's very like this generation's Barrett Oliver. He even looks a bit like him. Think back to Daryl and Cocoon and stuff like that from the 80s. Then you got a boy who's very much a sweet kid trying to play bad. So he likes musicals and singing and stuff like that, but he's trying to play a bit of a badass and all the rest
Trying
of
to
it.
be cool.
And then you got another one who's like a slightly overweight black kid, and even down to the hairstyle, he's a bit like Craig Robinson, I think Hot Tub Time Machine or something like that. And he's a compulsive truth teller. So every time they're in trouble, he admits it all. They're in like a store at one point, and see, even tasting beer is a big deal to them. Like, can they have 4 sips? You know what I mean? It's such a big deal. One of them steals a beer, but he puts it down his trousers, and this cop who's getting off work and just wants to go home sees it, and he goes, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's my penis." You know, it's a 12-year-old. But then the black kid has to admit everything because that's just a kid. So they're all different. They're all different. They vary much more than in a lot of these films, actually. I thought it was going to be a difficult sell. I genuinely thought, who's going to go and see this? Because we talk all the time about not particularly liking kid actors, and the idea of kids saying, you know, fuck or whatever is just like, well, so what? But because they're fairly knowing, they sort of know what they're doing, but they don't. It's brilliant. It's got stuff you've seen before. I mean, the very first scene of the film, he's getting close to the point he's about to start masturbating. You can tell. In that, like, I'm not sure if he has yet, but he's starting to get interested in anything that might have tits in it, and he wants to, like, close his bedroom door and things like that. And his dad walks in and just sits down and embarrasses him, and that's very like American Pie. There's a bit where they have to run across a busy freeway. That's Bowfinger. So there's stuff you've seen before, but just with these three and the sharpness of the script, it's really, really funny. And the last thing I want to say, which brings us full circle to where I started, 90 minutes long.
Yeah. It's what we need, isn't it? It's the golden
the best
night.
film of, if you forget nostalgia for 10 years ago, it might be the best film of this type we've had.
Yeah. It sounds very much to me like the premise is exposing the youth to adult things where they just don't quite know about, but know a little bit of.
They know a little bit. Like I say, I remember my mother, for example. Because Meet the Parents wasn't bad, the Ben Stiller film. I found it quite funny in places. Meet the Fockers was definitely not good. And the main joke seemed to be that child of about 2 hearing the word asshole and then copying it all the time. And my mum laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. And some toddler saying a word he doesn't understand isn't that funny to me. The fact that they think they know and misunderstand is utterly brilliant.
I've got to see it. I've got to see it now.
You have to see it.
Yeah, I have to see it.
The last 20 minutes drops away because it starts getting into the area of life lessons and all that kind of shit. But the first hour is as funny as a film as I've seen this year. And forget Anchorman, because Anchorman's like one of the funniest comedies I've ever seen. So when I'm talking about Adam McKay / Judd Apatow, that sort of area, and I would even throw Dodgeball into the mix, I think you could probably take Anchorman out of the mix, because I think the original Anchorman's funnier than any of it. But if you start thinking of Knocked Up, This Is 40, all of those other ones like Superbad and so on, I think this is better than any of them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was all Apatow, really, because he just had a knack for making it like about 20, 30 minutes way too long than it needs to be. But yeah, no, I'll definitely check that out. So, let's make a start on some films which I have seen. And what's first on our list? Is it X-Men?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've talked so much, you just take it away. Talk to me about Dark Phoenix.
Okay, well, God, what's to say about Dark Phoenix? I mean, it was trouble from the get-go. We all got told it was bloody awful or been reshot. Apparently, the original concept was going to be the Kree as the villains, but obviously Marvel already got that before. So, yeah, this is going to be the last of the X-Men films under Fox, because Marvel are going to take over from there on in. How, I don't know. But yeah, this is doing X-Men 3 again with the same filmmaker. the guy who wrote X-Men Last Stand, which dealt with Jean Grey going into Dark Phoenix, is now writing and directing the film about the Dark Phoenix. And you know what? It wasn't good. But you know what? It wasn't particularly terrible either. It had some moments. I think particularly when Magneto, Michael Fassbender's on screen. I think he particularly gives life to Magneto, and he has fun, doing his power, the use of his powers. He does really well. I remember the bit where he just crushes the entire carriage, just so flippantly.
Yeah,
it just looks so fucking cool. But yeah, it just felt like it was just not only rushed, but didn't really have any strong ideas of its own. I think the cast are fine, but again, they aren't given much to do. Who's the? Is it Sophie Turner?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was actually pretty good. I thought.
Relative to Apocalypse, yeah, because when I watched Apocalypse, I thought they're going to put a whole film around this woman.
Yeah, I mean, she stepped up really, but again, it just felt very much forced. You can tell Jennifer Lawrence was just contractually obliged just to kill me off, win the first act, please, thank you very much. I mean, it wastes no fucking time. I mean, from the moment it starts, I mean, we're right onto the X-Men having a bat phone to the president or whatever. It's like, oh no, well, I best ring the X-Men. I mean, what them mutant outlaws? Yes, then. So yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense. I forgot most of it now already, but I remember not hating it. It had some visual flair, but yeah, I think I saw it with someone who quite likes them, and she didn't particularly care for this one. It just felt like there wasn't much going on. So I think it just felt like very much half-baked product that they just had to sort of just get out of the way. And that was it, really. What do you think?
Again, I whenever I go to physically write reviews for a film, the problem is 3 stars is almost recommendation, because if you were, fresh rotten, it's fresh. 3 stars, I'm afraid. I've seen people give something 3 and mark it rotten, but you just go that's not playing the game. I'm sorry, that's 60%, 3 out of 5. But I struggle to give 2-star reviews unless I'm disappointed, unless there's something breakingly wrong with it. A film sort of conceptually almost starts at a 3, and then it either lets me down or it impresses me and sort of shifts from there. And Dark Phoenix did kind of neither. It was just all right. I think there's also, you cannot switch off expectations. You cannot switch off what you take into it. And I went into this film expecting a train wreck. It had been delayed and delayed and delayed. There was talk at one point, I don't know how true that rumour is, that there was even discussion of not releasing it. I think that's probably more the case with New Mutants, but certainly this one it was at least talked about. And then Apocalypse was horrendous. And I really can't stress enough how bad X-Men Apocalypse was in 2016. And the guy who'd written that abomination was writing this and directing it, and he's not really done anything else. And you just think, Bryan Singer doesn't want to do it anymore. Bryan Singer won't get work now, but at the point when they were hiring people, he could have carried on. And then you're putting it around Sophie Turner, who was one of the worst things in Apocalypse, just unbelievably bland. And I suddenly thought, I can see how we thought through Game of Thrones she might be okay, because in the Game of Thrones I watched, which was largely the early seasons, she was like very good at like downtrodden. But downtrodden, you can almost play it fairly bland and neutral because you've had all life sucked out of you by your scenario. So, and then you got the other problem that suddenly we're in 1990. I haven't seen this for a while, so I'm going to say 1995, but I may be a year out or two. But let's say 1995. And you think you started at the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was 1961. These people have aged 7 or 8 years, and you've got them playing 35 years older. Some of them that you brought in around Days of Future Past, like Quicksilver, barely aged. Like, how old are they meant to be? So all of that bothers me. So I went in expecting one of the train wrecks. And it's okay. You've got to forget all the things you've got to forget with this universe, that they shit on their continuity. So at the end of the film where they're sat retired, well, hang on a minute, this is now the same continuity of Days of Future Past, which he was still running years after this.
Mm.
So that doesn't make any sense. I mean, a lot of people will say, well, this happened there, and you go, no, that's the previous continuity. They've rebooted effectively because of Days of Future. I followed all of that, but it doesn't make any sense. Having said that, him and Eric finishing on the streets of, I think it was Paris, wasn't it? Playing chess at like a cafe. I thought, nice place to leave it. And that's how I felt about this film just generally. I thought, I mean, hiring Jessica Chastain and just having her standing around was just horrendous. That reminded me of Apocalypse. Apocalypse surrounded himself with mutants like Olivia Munn, who just stood there. Even in X3, I think Jean Grey, they had Jean Grey just stand around and look glowering in that. So there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot wrong with this series, and I think the bad. It's like the GoldenEye score. The bad absolutely drowns out the good, because if you sit and think about it, X-Men wasn't bad. X2 was very good. X3 wasn't. X-Men Origins Wolverine wasn't. But First Class was excellent. Days of Future Past I thought was good. Some people have that as the best in the series. I certainly don't, but it was good. The Wolverine the year before was pretty good. Logan was very good. So this series has produced a lot of decent stuff, but when it's bad, it's terrible.
Mm.
And this is actually the first entry in years that I just thought was all right. And that surprised me. I was expecting it to go into that like bottom three. You could almost split it in into three or four. You know, you take the 10 films they've done, and there's like 3 or 4 really good ones, and another 3 that are terrible, and the bottom 3 are terrible. And this is kind of sits on its own. It's not quite in the bottom 3. It's not as bad as X-Men Origins Wolverine. I don't think it's as bad as The Last Stand. What's the other one I think is shit? Apocalypse. It's not as bad as Apocalypse. But that middle tier where I would personally stick things like Days of Future Past. I think Days of Future Past is very close to the top tier, but it just about goes into the second for me. I would stick the Wolverine, the 2013 Wolverine film. It's sort of not quite as good as any of those. So it's kind of mediocre. Michael Fassbender's hardly in it, but he's good when he is. You're right about Jennifer Lawrence. I think if you don't want to... I sometimes feel like saying to her, go and find a fucking job you like. You know, you keep signing up to come in and wear the blue makeup and then refuse to wear it and get yourself written out as soon as possible. This is the first one in the series I thought McAvoy struggled with the dialogue. I thought the dialogue was weak and he struggled with it. And there's also a bit of de-aging in the first bit of the film. That prologue of him and Jean, which doesn't match where he met her before, but fine. They use a bit of subtle de-aging on his face, and it looks, when they do that badly, it looks really overlit and a bit waxy. I'm rambling now, really, so I'm going to just stop there. It's mediocre, but it's like just, and I mean just, it's a very soft 3-star, but it's like 3-star mediocre.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It's clearly a bad film, but somehow...
But it's not an offensively bad film.
Manages to get some enjoyment out of. I mean, it does have moments, and I do think it does have a very much a shorter running time as well than the others.
I know it's directed by a writer, and he's done a better job directing it than he did writing it. Because the dialogue's really ropey, but then the action set pieces, you go, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted them to rest it after Apocalypse. The studio won't agree because they'll probably lose money on this, all told. And it sat on a shelf, and it wasn't that well received, and all of those things. But they didn't leave it with Apocalypse, and I just think, well, if you had this one ready to go, and the timing was perfect because it opened around the time you closed the Fox deal, Disney, then I just think, like, and you got a nice bit with the cast of these newer films that have been very good, but not as iconic as the originals. McAvoy's not Patrick Stewart in terms of iconography, but you got to leave it on a nice point, and then paying sort of chest together and stuff. And I just thought, let's put a nice little bow on the series. It's not one of the stronger entries, but it's all right.
Yeah. How long do you think we'll get to seeing the X-Men return again?
I'll totally guess about 5 or 6 years. I think it'll be that long. I think it'll be that long because they know what's going to be in Phase 4. I think they might be able to put some teasers in or post-credit, stuff where you just see like an X somewhere or something that hints at the X-Men. I think they'll do Fantastic Four first. So you're thinking maybe, well, a phase is probably 3 to 4 years in Marvel terms, isn't it? So Phase 5 sometime, if the phases break down in the same way they always have. So I think 4 to 6 years, somewhere in that range. Because bear in mind, they're shooting. They've announced stuff through like 3 years from now. So there's probably not going to be. I mean, they announced Black Panther the other day, and it's 2022. So it's going to be after that.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Marvel. They've got like, everything's now stretched out now. Like, when's the new Doctor Strange out? I mean, the first one was 3 years ago.
It'll be 5 years after the first one.
That's just excessively too long.
2021. Hang on a minute. Doctor Strange and Doctor Strange 2. Let's just put that in for a minute. It's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, 7th of May 2021, so it'll be 4.5 years. Funny enough, this is where I perceived they'd have a problem with Sony and Spider-Man. Because if you're Sony and a lot of people, the number of people I read, but then they're not Bond fans, so I must forgive them. But they'll go, well, they've only got Bond and Spider-Man, and I'm thinking, they haven't got Bond. They had a distribution deal for a few films. They're nothing to do with James Bond anymore. So they don't have many big performing sequels. They've only had 2 films go over $1 billion. So if you've got Spider-Man and you've got a young actor and you can do film after film with him, you can have him go through the rest of high school, you can have his college years, you can have his young adulthood, you can have all of that. You're going to want a film every 2 years. You might slip to a third now and again. If you go into the Marvel machine and take your place in the queue, you are in danger of them saying, right, we'll release the next one in 4 years. And they're never going to want to do that. And for anyone who might say, because it's crossed my mind, well, they wouldn't do that with Spider-Man, would they? Why would they leave it 4 years? Well, they're leaving it 4 years with Black Panther. It's one of the biggest films they've ever produced. Black Panther's still not as iconic. And, again, if you were then to say, well, he's not as big as Spider-Man, is he? Well, amongst what audience? A 12-year-old now probably has as much attachment to Black Panther as he does Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I thought that would cause a problem because Sony will want to accelerate faster than Marvel. They'll have Spider-Man popping up everywhere if they can, but in terms of like solo films,
they'll probably be like refilming by the beginning of next year for a new Spider-Man.
That's the point. If you've got 2 to 3 films per year, that basically says every 6th film in your entire universe has to be a Spider-Man film.
Yeah.
And I don't see them doing that. Particularly when one of those 5, 6 is going to be in the normal run of things. Perhaps some kind of team up. a couple, two or three of them are going to be, other sequels, because you've got to make room for Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy, Captain Marvel, Black Panther, and others. I'm not ready. Thor is still a going concern. Suddenly, you've taken up all your slots, and then you want to introduce the Eternals and everything else, and Shang-Chi. It's like, well, where's your room to just be cramming in a Spider-Man film all the time? Unless you let Sony release it on its own schedule and just say, well, we've got our 3 slots a year, but if you want to throw in a Spider-Man film on your own schedule and it's effectively one of ours as well, fine. So the next problem you've got is Kevin Feige as not only having to keep that schedule and follow up the biggest film of all time, adjusted, but Disney Plus is about to launch. And I can't believe Kevin Feige will have no day-to-day interest in Falcon and WandaVision and the Loki TV show and She-Hulk and everything else. And I think that was part of the problem with Spider-Man as well. We're talking about Spider-Man early because we're going to come to it later, but we are on the whole Marvel schedule and Fox films coming into the fold. And then you think, on top of that, he might have to launch X-Men, and will he launch it as part of that run, or will X-Men become its own thing, although it's tied to the MCU? They're kind of going to become victims of their own success, and I can't see where there's room for everything. Hence, we're getting... I mean, Thor will be 4 years on. Yeah, there's going to be like effectively 4 to 5 year gaps between characters appearing and then reappearing, and I think that's too long. But they've got so many different properties that it won't hurt them, but it will hurt fans of the individual sub-franchises. Because if you've got a Spider-Man who's like in his very early 20s playing a teenager, strike while the iron's hot. Don't wait fucking 5 years every time. They didn't with Homecoming and Far From Home, but I suspect that was part of all the issues. And it does feed into everything we're saying here, that you've got to get X-Men running and you've got to get Fantastic Four running, but you've still got to do a Black Panther sequel, a Thor sequel, a Doctor Strange sequel, a Guardians of the Galaxy, and so on. And whatever team-up is coming next, and the Eternals, and Shang-Chi, and all these TV shows.
I think that be careful what you wish for springing to mind. Because I think you're just going to have, I think Marvel's going to be overwhelmed with so much to do that I think the standard in quality is going to give way, and I think it's going to be a little bit for everyday audiences. It's going to be a bit oversaturized, and you're going to have some that's going to be a hit. I'm sure, for example, the next Black Panther film, that'll have no problems at all because it's Black Panther. But you're going to have I think our general audiences will probably start to be a bit more choosy about what it is they're going to actually be bothering with when it comes out.
I think I spent 3 phases waiting for the plates to come crashing. And I don't mean so I could smile and say, told you so. I didn't want them to crash at all. I really did not.
But everything has its end, doesn't it?
But they kept it going through all 3 phases. And I think that's a miracle. And so it's right at that point where you go, oh, well, they're not going to fuck it up then. And it's like, that's the point when you do. Because I just look at the slate now and just think this is too much. You had a core set of Phase 1 characters. I know you augmented it with different things, like Black Panther came along at the start of Phase 3 and so on. But you had a core set of characters that it was built around those first 3 phases, and now they're just going to expand and expand and expand. As I say, I've mentioned it briefly, but that's forgetting Guardians and stuff like that. And all of us, and you can be a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and maybe that's enough for you. But if you're a fan of any of the constituent bits, you're going to be faced with 2 to 3 films in a decade from the bits you like. So you can see how it became a problem. But I think my point then is, I don't know how X-Men is its own world. So surely they're not just going to do an X-Men film every 4 years and that's it. Every 12th film.
Because so many characters in X-Men. I mean, in a way, it's almost better to have X-Men have its own thing. I felt a little bit like that with Guardians. I'm glad it's under the MCU, and if you want to say it's part and have it teaming up, then fine. But I always feel like treat it separate. Yeah.
I don't know. If we knew how to do this, we'd be doing it and we'd be wealthy. We don't, we're not.
We don't know the right people as well. So.
So it's not that we know better, but there's warning signs in all this, and I think with the Sony Marvel thing, people are focused on agreed. We'll talk about that a little bit maybe when we get to Spider-Man. I don't know, but
Okay.
they're focusing. We'll come back to the whole sort of critique of the deal. We're talking more conceptually about the Marvel universe and perhaps the problem Sony would have with it. If we talk about what we think happened when it came, we'll get to it in a minute.
So let's talk about something interesting. Man in Black International.
Carry on.
Okay, well, good things I would say. Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Hemsworth. Is probably what I'll say in terms of good. It's just a bit very average, though, isn't it? Really.
It's a film so bland. I struggle to remember what, if anything, I ever liked about this franchise.
It's. Oh, I mean, to be honest, like the franchise never really got going post the first film. I'm
including the first film in that. And what I mean by that is the first film was interesting in as much as, and I almost have to convince myself that I am right on this because it doesn't sound very plausible, but it does. I'm sure it's true. Posters, because I was getting ready to go. Long story. I had sort of 2 spells at university, but I was about to go back to university, and earlier in the summer. I was getting my bits and pieces together, and I thought I'll get some posters for my room and all the rest of it. And I was looking. I was in the HMVs of this world, looking through the posters quite a lot, and I kept happening across Men in Black, and it was the 2 leads in black suits. It looked like Reservoir Dogs. And I'm pretty sure the earliest posters did not have saving the world from the scum of the universe. I'm sure it didn't have that tagline. So I didn't know what it was. And funnily enough, the naivety of that era that you didn't watch every trailer 4 dozen times online, I went in not knowing what it was. I might have seen Saving the World from the Scum of the Universe by then. And I went in going, that's odd. I thought this was going to be like a comedy version of Reservoir Dogs. And I walked in and it was this like kind of rubbery CG creation of like aliens and stuff. And I always thought it was all right. People now there's a number of films like this from our childhood, and I wasn't a child when Men in Black came out, but this imagining that it was this unimpeachable classic. Men in Black was an all right film, and it did very well, and it was funny, and the song did all right. You know, back when Will Smith used to like literally hit the charts with his rapping.
Wiki wow, wiki wow.
Yeah, and I always thought the film was okay. So when Men in Black 2 came out and everyone said, what a fucking appalling follow-up to such a great film, I was like, well, the first one was pretty good and this is pretty bad. The gap between the two is not as big as you playing up, really. But, when they had to sort of use the deneuralizer to get Tommy Lee Jones's memories back, and you just thought, it might as well have a sign just saying plot device written on it. It's quite lazy. And then the third one I just was really bored by. I think all I'm trying to say is I'm not sure there's a franchise here. Funnily enough, this is deja vu because we're covering RoboCop on the other podcast, and I've been saying that for like a couple of weeks now about that franchise. That actually it's not a franchise. It's a one-off curio that you keep trying to make something of. Well, what's the coincidence here? This is Columbia Pictures again. This is Sony. Sony don't have many franchises. So every now and again, studios that don't have franchises will try and bring one back. Men in Black, the first one was 1997. The second one was 2002. I think the third one was 9 or 10 years after that. I think it was 2011 or 12. It's either 9 or 10 years. And then we've gone 7 or 8 years again. And you think, all right, the studios have to physically make this film. But if the appetite had truly been there, we wouldn't have had those gaps. Maybe the first one or whatever. I don't know. Maybe there'd been a gap and it's let's try this again. But if this was genuinely a going concern, we'd be getting these every like 3 years at maximum. But the very fact that there's a long gaps every time tells me every now and again the studio goes, let's see if we can relaunch this. And they've basically done it 3 times now. And this is, I don't know if this is the weakest of the 3 or not. Again, I think 2 is often seen as the nadir, but I've seen all of them as a bit boring. It's not that interesting. I don't even know what the central joke is, because they are fairly light and comedic, but I don't know what the central joke is. Is the central joke they're just dressed in black and they don't have their own style and past or personality or anything? Is the joke that their weapons are, varying sizes?
It's not a joke, it's just a concept. It's a concept that the mysterious men of black
I feel like it's so comedic that I've missed what the central joke is, because I can't see what about this as a franchise is that funny.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't think there is a central joke. There's a concept, and we're living in a world which aliens secretly coexist with humans, and that in itself is a bit of a silly idea. So you go for a comedic tone, and that's it. I don't think there is a central joke to it.
And this one feels focus group to death.
Yeah,
because
it was originally going to be Jump Street versus Men in Black, wasn't it? Or there were.
I never got that. I mean, that just strikes me. I don't know. Coronation Street versus Inspector Morse. It's like those two things don't go together. It's like it's just 2 properties you own. I don't know. I'm trying to think of another example. Toy Story versus the Lone Ranger. I don't get it. But you got Emma Thompson at the start, and then she only appears at the end again. And you think why? And you think because the film's been away for a while, so they've had to focus group and discuss and committee this whole idea of how do we establish it in continuity with the previous films. Right, let's have some nods to J&K, and there's a couple of oblique references. Okay, they're legendarily efficient. We're sending her there to learn and everything else. Great. Okay, so if he's the greatest agent in the world, why are there problems in London? So they imply H has taken his eye off the ball since he saved the world. Doesn't tell us why or how. It set it up as though there's some central trauma that happened to him that night, and you think there's going to be some reveal there, but it's not. In fact, he doesn't even remember it. So they haven't thought about that. And then you got the story starts with a flashback to like 3 years ago when he was saving the world. And then we go back a further 20 years. And then we come back to present day. And it's like, okay, so you've argued you've argued about what you should do, and then never really made a decision. And then on top of that, you've got CG that still looks rubbery. It still looks like it's made in 1997. And none of it's hateful, but you don't have... I suppose the central thing with the first one would have been you had a very light and loose and playful Will Smith playing off a curmudgeonly Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
There isn't that same dynamic this time. I suppose it's meant to be student with wiser than they look student, or wiser than their years student with teacher who's actually a bit of a waster, almost like educating Rita or something. I don't know. So it's just one of those things where they've just gone, what should a Men in Black film have in it? Right, how do we tie it to the last one? Okay, if he's that great, why is there problems? Okay, if there are problems, he's troubled. Why is he troubled? And they haven't answered after those questions. Who the villain is really, really obvious. And that's it, really.
Yeah. Very little character work as well, because...
it doesn't lend itself to character work, this franchise, so they have to kind of cheat. People either don't have their memories wiped properly, or they're told something they shouldn't know, or something like that. Chris Hemsworth becomes like he's a legendary agent, one of the greatest they've ever had. And by the time we find him, he's a partying idiot. And you think,
Yeah.
well, I could understand that if it was a midlife crisis, but this man is still in his 30s. And again, it's something to do with 2016. Great, can't wait to find out what that is. We don't. Did he take his foot off the gas because he'd had his greatest glory? Has there been some trauma? We don't know.
Well, he's had like part of his mind removed, hasn't he? But that was it.
That's just memory, though.
So
The dialogue's really shit. Basically, it's updated because you can tell it's filmed this year.
yeah,
You go back and watch the old one, and it's shot on film, so you've got second and third passes and the deep degradation of film that happens with that. You've got some of the music of the era. I mean, nothing more 90s than Will Smith rapping. The CG's really in its infancy, so it's kind of rubbery. So all of that draws the distinction we're in a modern era. The cars all look new and stuff like that. But apart from that, this is a bit like you have a massive hit with the film and then you go to launch it on TV and you start with a 2-hour TV film. Now, it's bigger budget than that. It actually looks quite expensive, but it's almost like when they do that, they just rehash the big screen version for the small screen. They just go, well, it was a bit like this, but we've got to introduce some new characters. It's really weak. I've heard people go, "Oh, it's the worst film of the year" and stuff like that. I gave it a 2-star review. It's weak. It's not hatefully weak. It's just
bland.
When are you gonna get? It's painfully bland. Where are you gonna get? When are you gonna get to the understanding that if you're leaving such long gaps between entries, it's because you don't have a series. It's like a goldfish memory. Every time it takes you 5 years to swim round the bowl. And when you get round to where you started, you forgot that you'd ever been there. And it's that sort of thing. There's never been a clamour for this. But in 5 or 6 years' time, or 10 years' time, or whatever it is, they'll go, Men in Black, let's try that. Unless they've been bought by Disney, which will probably happen. Sony will realise, their Spider-Man films will drop away in popularity, or something will happen, or they'll need to reboot that again, and they'll suddenly go, what do we have? And they don't have very much, so they'll do another Men in Black film, and they'll do it with somebody else. And it will be exactly like this, because actually, allowing for the fact that the first one is quite a bit stronger, I'll agree with that. All 4 Men in Black films have been the same fucking film. They have. Slight rinse and repeat and a slight variation in quality between them all, but they're all kind of the same film. You get all the same stuff. Look how funny that creature looks, or that creature that's tiny is actually quite powerful, or that creature that's quite big isn't that strong, or these people you thought were celebrities on Earth are actually not. That sort of thing. And underpinning it all, you've got agents who you can't know anything about because they're not supposed to know anything about themselves, really, or each other rather. They know their own back's history. So you just go, well, you can't make anything of this. But they don't see it. They don't see it, and they'll try again in a few years' time.
Yeah. The only good thing about that though is that we do get to see what a little possibility of what Chris Hemsworth's take of Bond would be.
Yeah, there's a couple of times he's in Bond mode, definitely. Again, he's playing British in it as well, which helps. He's in a suit most of the time. But Chris Hemsworth spins on a dime between serious and incredibly playful. And that's what his Bond would be. It would have flavours of all of the Bonds in it, but it would be its own thing. It would be its own take, because he actually plays deeply emotional very well, but he plays flippant and silly very well, but he plays charming very, very well. But it's that playful, likeable charming, not that smarmy, get your knickers off charming. I think he would be very, very good in it. I mean, it varies from scene to scene, and I can't remember now because I haven't seen it for a while. But there were points in the film where I went, "Yep, that's his Bond scene."
Like when he's driving up on the boat to that island to meet.
That was Bond going.
The 3-armed. What's her name? Rebecca Ferguson.
that was Bond on his way to see Mathis in Quantum of
Yeah.
Solace or something. He looks good in everything they put him in. He looks good in every environment you put him in. But the main thing is, he can within genre cinema do everything asked of him. He can do dishevelled and wasted. He can do incredibly elegant. He can do very, very funny. He can do very heartfelt, and he has no vanity as an actor, which is rare for somebody who looks like that. So it wouldn't be the Pierce Brosnan fuck me a hair's out of place. My biggest problem with a Henry Cavill, for example, is I genuinely think Henry Cavill would be Pierce Brosnan Mark II. And what I mean by that is Pierce Brosnan didn't have his own take on James Bond at all. He didn't have a take. He just put the suit on and kind of said some sort of lines and looked a bit cool, and that was it. I don't think he had the first idea how to play the role. That's not to say he was all bad, but he was bland, and the era's bland now. And I think that's what Cavill would be. I think he's actually really good in Mission Impossible, and I won't wear he can't act. That's absolute bullshit. But I just think he would be another greatest hits Bond. And I don't think Chris Hemsworth would be.
He'd be stripped down. He'd be stripped down, kind of like I'm Bond, James Bond, kind of thing. He'd be a little bit stern, but a bit smooth, charming, but
he's not from central casting in the same way. So I would be interested to see it. I've not got the investment in it that me continually mentioning it suggests, because I don't think for a moment it would happen.
Probably not.
So I'm just happy to sit here and like occasionally chuck his name in, knowing that there's no risk of it happening. It's just not going to happen. But he would be.
Though he did throw his name into the hat though a bit around this time.
Yeah, I know. I used to put him forward as almost like a left field choice, but I'm going to drop the pretense now. He's my choice. That's it. It's not like, well, what about if? No, he's my choice. There are I mean, if you didn't have to adjust for age, I'd love like Fassbender, but he's just too old. He's not going to do it now.
Yeah. You can't go with Fassbender now, sadly.
But a number of people who still say that, it should be him.
Tom Hardy.
Like, if do you want someone of 47 on debut? Well, Roger Moore. Yeah, well, Roger Moore's too old. So
especially for now as well. But anyway,
it's the fact. Somebody said the other. No, it was months ago. Sorry. Somebody said on a feed, I thought they were going to get really aggressive, and then they actually turned out to be absolutely 100% reasonable. Because I said to them, someone said, I promise you this is true. They said Clive Owen. I said, he's too old. And they said, yeah, but he's only 3 years older than Daniel Craig. But Daniel Craig's coming to the end of his run. They couldn't grasp that the fact that someone of that age has played Bond isn't an excuse for casting someone at that age. You need someone to be ready for a 10-year run, and preferably longer, because they're so infrequent now. You want to get 4 films out of them.
See that's 20 years off 50.
That's 27 years. No, you want maybe a dozen years.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be casting much beyond late 30s. I'd make it, if it's 41 or something, I'm not going to argue too hard, for the sake of a year or two. But once you get into mid 40s, it's too late. So Fassbender, Hardy, Elba, basically anyone who's a 70s child, it's not happening.
It'd be someone my age, really, wouldn't it?
You might even be a year or two past the age, but I'm sure you're gutted because
because I had all my hopes on that.
You were doing some press ups.
Yes.
Getting ready.
Waiting for that call.
How short are we going to go? 5'6". That's the other thing. It's the idea that because you went a bit shorter with somebody said Tom Hardy, and I said he's too short. Well, he's too old, but I said he's too short. And someone said he's 5'9", and I said, yeah, that's too short. They said, well, Craig's only 5'10", and I'm like, yes, but it's incrementally getting shorter. It's like, how far are we going to go? Bond's meant to be reasonably tall. You know what I mean? In the
Mm.
books, he was about 6 foot, but that's when average heights were shorter than they are now. And Bonds are normally 6'1", 6'2". Craig was an exception. That doesn't mean the next person you cast has to be 5'7" and look
Yeah.
like in Sid James. But there you go. So yeah, no, he would be my choice. He's wasted on this stuff. He's got to be a little bit careful. He's got Marvel and he's doing very well, but he's picked the wrong script a few times now. Outside of Marvel, so I would just hope he's just a little bit careful, because the Men in Black's hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it was never a great idea.
Mm. Yeah, I guess not. I think there was just no appetite for it, was there? With like even one of the announcement of it, was just like,
Well, really? Yeah.
I was just like, okay.
What, you want to do one of them? All right, fair enough.
Yeah. So off to something a little bit more independent, should we say? Brightburn. What do you make of that, Dave?
Brightburn is it's not wildly my genre. The reason I went to see it was twofold. James Gunn's involvement. Now, I've been around long enough with enough interest in the film industry that, from the makers of, from the producers of, and it's people who sit behind the scenes and actually don't have much to do with the artistic direction. So that's the caution on this point, but James Gunn was involved in this. And he seemed to be fairly hands-on with it as well. He's a producer in the same way like J.J. Abrams is a producer. It's hands-on when he does these things. The main thing that drew me to it was like the Elseworlds Smallville take. I'm not a massive comic book reader, but one of the ones I've enjoyed most in my life was Red Sun. Red Sun was a what if novel, if you like, in Elseworlds, where Superman didn't land in Kansas. He landed in like the Urals in Russia. It's basically he landed 8 hours earlier or 8 hours later, whichever way the Earth turns. So he ended up becoming like effectively like a Russian dictator and stuff like that. And you've got, he becomes a bit of a puppet of the government, and then he ends up in charge. And I can't remember all of the details now, but he grows up as Superman, but he's like a Russian version. So, and then you had Lex Luthor as this genius in America, like tracking all of this, and so that interested me, that it was going to be this take on Superman. What I would say, I suppose, the action is the wrong word in horror, really, isn't it? But the scares, the jumps, the set pieces were very, very good. Particularly the one I thought in the diner, where he wanted revenge on that woman. She ended up with glass in her eyes and all that sort of thing. I thought that was really good. And that's someone who doesn't watch a lot of horror, but it struck me as really, really well done. I guess my only concern with this film was it only seemed to have a point post-credits. Post-credits, it felt like, okay, it's setting up a Justice League Dark or something.
I thought that with the end bit, because you kind of have like Michael Rooker as the, should we say, an Alex Jones type.
Yes,
who was doing these, like, sort of commenting on all these other things, like a woman who strangles people, men with rope or whatever, and a sea creature. So basically, kind of like when you consider that with, say, what was that film James Gunn did that was kind of like Kick-Ass? Was it Super?
Yes.
It's kind of, you kind of, okay, well that's his Batman. You can kind of sort of say, is he setting up his own cinematic universe, like his own kind of Dark Justice League kind of thing?
And actually, I suspect it's just a payoff.
Probably.
I mean, I love the Michael Rooker bit, and he does appear in all James Gunn stuff. So it was like, just to remind you, it's a James Gunn product, and it's great. I love Michael Rooker anyway, as we always have. I've probably seen a fraction of his stuff as well, but every time I see him, it's like, you are so fucking good. And if you want someone to come in and give the screen a blast of energy, he's your man. So I really liked all that. But, the whole premise of the film, I don't know if this was in any of the marketing. And I don't know if this was ever any kind of tagline, because it sounds shit in my head. But the film was certainly sold on, what if Superman wasn't benevolent? What if Superman was evil? What if Superman discovered his powers? And the simple answer is, well, he'll just fucking kill everyone. So,
Yeah,
okay, then, well, that's answered that. Brilliant.
it's just
I liked it. It was an atmospheric film, and the kid was great. And I'm saying that more and more now because I hate fucking kid actors. But I love kids, but I hate kid actors. But
you know what,
actually,
it might be locked down to like just how they're treated as well, more than anything. Like,
he was deliberately playing a bit detached anyway.
yeah,
You know, there's autistic would be the wrong word, but he's just detached. He's not. He's not. For anyone out there who's seen the TV show Mindhunter on Netflix, I recommend it. The second series, Holt McCallany's character, his son in it, is an adopted character who has some adopted son who has some kind of trauma, and he goes very like this, not evil, but just detached. He didn't feel anything. There's one point in the film he finds out he's told like a friend or relative's died. Turns out he's killed him actually, but and he's like, okay. He's like, is that all? And it's like, what? Am I supposed to cry? You know, it is literally like, what do you actually want from me? I was a little bit confused by it because the craft seems to be talking to him. So is that an inherent evil? Is this trying to say something about nature versus nurture?
I don't
Because
know.
he's brought up with a good family, so it isn't like, well, they're not the Kents. Well, no, they're still pretty decent though, and all they wanted was a child. They're trying to have a child at the start, so he's brought up by decent people in a safe environment, fairly rural, which tends to be safer. Full stop. But this craft is calling to him in much the same way that the Green Crystal calls to Kal-El on the farm. If you watch the 1978 Superman. So there's clearly some dominant voice or being from wherever he's come that's like pushing him down this path. But we don't understand what that is, why that is, if there is some fundamental fight between his inherent, between his nature and his nurture, between what he's born with, his genetics, and all that kind of thing, and the way they're raising him. And really, the film was just perfectly entertaining in a marching with inevitability way. There were two good set pieces. I like the set piece with the car. I think that's the teacher's husband he kills.
Yeah.
The teacher being like his aunt.
Well, she wasn't a teacher. She was like the school
Counsellor.
Yeah. And you had a good stalky bit with her as well before, didn't you? You think?
Yeah, and he is creepy turning up at the house and the lights going on. They're sound activated lights outside, like patio lights and stuff, or porch lights, or whichever side of the house is which. And so that set piece is everything from when he first turns up to that house to when he kills her husband is superb. Everything in the diner is superb. That's killing like a schoolmate. It's a schoolmate's mother, isn't it? He breaks her hand, doesn't he, and all that. I'm struggling.
Yeah, it was the girl that initially fancies.
He fancies. He just turns up in her bedroom and things like that.
Yeah.
And he's just becoming. So part of it intrigues me. It's a bit like watching a compressed version of Breaking Bad. In that Breaking Bad, he starts as a decent guy and just turns into Scarface. That was the pitch. Mr. Tips becomes Scarface. You're watching this kid, and there's a horrible inevitability to it, but that's also its weakness. The weakness, the strength of the film is you've got enough attachment to this family that it's awful to watch. And the first time he puts his hands in the blades of the lawnmower, he's frightened, like, what's happening to me? So there's a horrible inevitability to it, but that's also its weakness in that what happens if Superman isn't benevolent? Well, he'll just get worse and kill people, and that's all the film is. And it takes like a couple of 90 minutes or a couple of hours or whatever it is to tell that story. And then post credits, it teases something that looks absolutely awesome.
Yeah, like a nightmare version of the Justice League. It's I said I think one of the key issues is like I think you hinted with Good Boys. It was 90 minutes. So it knew when to get in and get out. It had a simple enough premise. I mean, it wouldn't. It would overstay that welcome had it been longer because we all know where it's going. I mean, we might not quite know how it ends exactly.
Yeah, a 2.5 hour epic just to get to, well, he's going to kill everyone, isn't he?
Yeah, or we're going to or he's going to go evil and either he's going to kill everyone and win, or they find a way to
But either way, in a 2-hour film forget
Yeah,
credits for a minute, but in a 2-hour film, he's going to be an ever increasing, getting stronger monster for 119 minutes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it knew its running length and just got on with it, which is good. Yeah, it was a well made what if idea. The only thing that left me feeling with was I'm not sure what it says. As you said before with like nature versus nurture, I wasn't. The only thing I could think of was like, was this a comment on the loss of the modern family of today? Like how Superman was raised by the Kents. Well, they were a good, wholesome American family of the time. Is that a comment on today's society, which how we raise children, even though these are good people? They're not bad parents by any stretch of the mark. But is there something that's missing today that was paramount back then? But then again, as you say, the spaceship was calling to him, so that tends to be sort of giving him all the bad shit anyway. So what's going on there that we don't actually know. So the only thing, so the only sort of disappointment I have walking away was a bit, okay, well, I'm not quite sure what point that was, but for the 90 minutes it was on, I thought it was quite effective and quite brutal in a way that wasn't sort of too glorified.
Yeah. I mean, I watched it in a double bill with something else. I got to remember what that was now. I'll have a look in a minute. But I watched it with something else, and it was good. It was just one of those things where, I watched it just before Toy Story 4. That was it.
Oh, what double bill?
Well, I just thought it was perfect. Bit of yin and yang, you know what I mean? So, and again, because it's 90 minutes, it's perfect for double bills.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you can time these things well if you're lucky. So you miss all the sort of like bullshit before the second film. So you come out of 190 minutes and walk straight into another or whatever.
Yeah.
So I liked it. I didn't love it. This genre isn't speaking to me. It never is. I went in because it was a Superman thing, not because it was a horror thing. It's because I've got some investment in James Gunn's point of view on the world. I've got a lot of investment in sort of Superman. I miss the fact we're not getting Superman films. I really don't like that very much.
Wait, what you mean? Batman v Superman wasn't a Superman film?
It's 3 years ago, Chris. It's been a long time since that. It's been over 40 months since that classic. Now available on our YouTube page. Even a lot of people have problems with Man of Steel. I had some problems with Man of Steel, particularly the third act, which was a fucking mess. But I've liked most incarnations of Superman to some degree, including the Cavill one. So I'd love to see more Superman. So I went in with that aspect, really. As I say, the set pieces are good. The performances are really good. This sort of thing rise and falls on premises and set pieces, to be honest with you, because all horror films do the fucking same. It goes dark. Are they there? Were they there at the window? Were they not there at the window? Ooh, jump scare. Ooh, that kind of shit. I find horror just speaks a language that just doesn't talk to me. That's all, by and large. Not this sort of thing. Some vaguely eerie stuff can sometimes. But as I say, set pieces were good. So, and it was... I was pleased for the post-credit bit just because it put some levity into the film, because the film was quite serious. It was
grim.
It was quite grim, yeah. And that's half the reason it's not a genre I like, because my life is hard enough. I don't need 2 hours of grim as well.
It did remind me. This didn't remind me, but I watched the Amazon Prime series, The Boys.
Yeah, I've not seen it.
It's good. It is pretty decent, but again, that's like another like what if we had superheroes and they were dicks. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of it's that kind of like take of like this kind of dark, twisted like what if kind of thing. So yeah, and then that has some horrible shit involving an airplane as well, which this film did. So Bright generally thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just looking up The Boys now. Fight via superpower people who abuse their abilities. Okay. I recognise heroes. Most are arrogant and corrupt. Yeah, okay. Actually, looking at, is Jack Quaid any relation to Dennis Quaid?
Yeah.
Yes, he is. Okay, yeah, he's their son. I remember that. I remember them having a boy called Jack now, yeah. Carl Urban, okay. Yeah, all right, I'll look into that on my own time, but yeah, okay.
Only 8 episodes so far, but it's
That's
been
a
pretty
selling
good.
point at the moment because I don't watch a lot of TV anyway, so I can never fucking be bothered. That's the problem. I look at it and go, that could. The number of things that I'd hear raves about and I'd still never bother. So, I look at this and go, I probably won't bother. But you're not the first person to say this to me, that I ought to look into it. Garth Ennis. I know that name.
Yeah, he did Preacher. Well, he
That'll
used
be
to go. Yeah, it's worth a
okay.
look. It's worth a look. You can have it. Like you can watch all episodes within a weekend. Depending on how busy you are that weekend. But
What are they, roughly an hour?
yeah, well, roughly an hour.
Dan Trachtenberg involved. All right. I used to listen to him on podcasts before he started like directing and stuff. Yeah, he was on the Totally Rad show. Okay. Yeah. So that's so if we move on to the third Marvel film of the year.
Oh yeah, Spider-Man.
Last time will be Spider-Man. Yeah, the debate before we go into the film itself, the debate on. Again, it pisses me off about the internet, but I ought to know better than to get upset by this stuff. Everyone's talking with complete and total and 100% knowledge of what happened. So you get people.
Oh, it was all Sony's fault, and
no, that's not true because Disney said this, Sony said that, and they couldn't agree this. And I'm thinking, were you fucking there? My understanding is because that was another thing. People said, well, they wanted half the profits, and it's like. No, they wanted a co-financing deal. The details of that are not clear. Because people went, well, they were already getting 5%. Why they want 50 now? That's greed. Well, we don't know that. I've heard different versions where it's a smaller amount. They would put in the requisite funding and they were going to give up part of the merchandising rights and all that. That's, I think, all I really wanted to say about the money side. I would just caution anyone at the stage where this show comes out. Obviously, this will date because we'll find out the truth one day, or it will reverse. They'll be back. Spider-Man will be back in the MCU, and this will be a museum piece. I hope that's the case. In terms of this conversation,
that could be that could be a different thing. It could actually be Sony being like, actually, all right, we're willing to pull out. And it could make sort of like Marvel go, all right, then we'll come back.
It might literally be Venom did really well and Spider-Verse did really well, and they looked at it and went, we know how to do this now. We've had Marvel's input. We've had Disney give us time, give us their best producer, give us ideas on casting, ideas on how you put these things together, visual aesthetic. Storytelling, all that sort of thing, and we're underway now. We don't need them. But my genuine, wholehearted guess, and it is a guess. I think it has something to do with how much time Marvel can give to a Spider-Man property that, because it's owned by a different studio, can't go at the pace they're going to go with all the other characters. You cannot have Kevin Feige virtually in constant development on a Spider-Man film.
Yeah.
So then you've got to look at other part. He's got to be like more of an exec producer role then, where he sticks his head round the door now and again, and things go across his desk occasionally, and he's kept informed. But that's it. And it's like, that's not the deal we signed for. We gave up all those merchandising rights because you were going to give us Kevin Feige and his input. Marvel produced a kind of an iconic film in terms of Black Panther. In terms of cultural reach, that film was massive, and it did close to $1.5 billion. And yet we're going to wait 4 years for a sequel. If they can do that with Black Panther, then they're not going to bend over on having Spider-Man every 2 years without fail. They managed it with Homecoming and Far From Home. But if you said to Marvel, you have to have a Spider-Man film every 24 months in perpetuity with all of those other properties they've got and TV, and yet to launch Fantastic Four and X-Men, I think something's got to give.
Yeah.
But it's a guess.
It's as good as guess as any, though, isn't it? Really.
But that's what makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Now there might be an element of money in it. I don't know. Is the honest answer. But people are now. It started off with everyone blamed Sony, and they blame Sony because they want Spider-Man in the MCU, so they are the blocker. Why do you have to own the fucking property anyway? Is what there is underneath all of that. But then, as it sort of went on a few days, it did a 180, and it became totally Disney and Disney greed. Given that they have taken on the film for barely any of the money up front from the box office anyway, and I find it very hard to believe that Disney would shoot themselves in the foot. And then you got the next argument that I've heard, which is, well, Disney have got so much money, why can't they just, this nebulous, they can sort it out with money, be that buy the character back or pay.
Yeah.
It's just like, Sony aren't going to sell Spider-Man. Let's just leave it at that. They're not going to sell Spider-Man. Again, I hope one day this is a museum piece, and they did, and we can look back on this naive conversation we had. But they'd be very, very silly to. So, I just think it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another, probably. But I'm throwing all these caveats in because what the fuck do we know?
Yeah.
If you're on Facebook going, this is what happened at Disney this, you haven't got a fucking clue what you're talking about. If you're right, you're lucky because you're guessing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like we said, it's like you're faced with a choice. Okay, well Spider-Man can remain with Marvel in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you get a new Spidey film every 4 years, free if you're lucky. But it's not going to be for another 5 years now anyway, because of the schedule's already backed up now.
They'd have crammed one in somewhere, but yes, as a general rule,
right,
for a while.
Backing out Sony, where everything already set up, you already got your lead man, and potentially your cast, and you've got your basic Spider-Man universe, maybe not Marvel universe, but you kind of got your setting in place.
And he's got a brilliant rogues gallery. It's nearly as good as Batman's.
And so there you are. Just then you've got like another film probably by 21, early 21 probably. And then another film in the next 2 years, or maybe less than that if they're on ball.
And if at any point you start to struggle, all you got to do is pick up the phone and say, "Are you interested in being re-involved with your character?" They're not going to say no. Well, it's not a question of not blaming Sony or not blaming Marvel. It's just saying they're shades of grey, and we're guessing.
Yeah.
Sony's statement did stress the time that producers could give to it the other side. Everything else around money is an insider said, and we think this, and so on. I've no doubt some have interpreted that as they suddenly said, we want half the profits. I don't think they picked up the phone and said, that 5% we're getting, make it 50. Don't think it worked like that. They wanted a co-financing agreement. It's as simple as that. Now, if you're Sony, and you put out, I don't know, 400 million, a couple hundred to million, 300 to 400 million by the time you make and market, and you take back $1 billion. Crudely speaking, there's a decent profit margin there. Now, if Marvel finance half of it, they're taking half the profit as well, and the profit's greater than what they're putting into it, obviously. In other words, you're losing half your back end on it. So I can understand why it's ended up where it is. I just think it's a shame, because once you start in this universe, to take it away from people's a bit of a shame. It really is. Do you know who I feel most sorry for in all of this? Happy Hogan, because he just started to knob Aunt May, right? And now that's going to have to stop, isn't it?
Well, to be fair, I think Aunt May kind of knocked him back a bit though at the end, which was kind of harsh.
He was in there.
He was, but then he kind of assumed it was a full-time thing. She was like, "No, come on, it's not a full. we're not dating, that kind of thing. I thought that's a bit fucking harsh, Aunt May.
Well, they're not going to be dating at all now.
No.
So look forward to like Abby Hogan knocking one out whilst crying during like Black Panther 2 or something. The film itself, Far From Home, I think it's a bit of a... I still don't think we've had a great Spider-Man film yet. I think the funny thing is, one day we're going to do the Spider-Man films, the non-Marvel ones. That leaves us in existential angst about what we do about future Spider-Man sequels.
Yeah.
Do they go with Marvel or do they go with... Anyway, but certainly when we come back to the MCU one day, Far From Home will be one of the ones we cover because it's an MCU film. But when we cover Spider-Man soon, we're going to be covering Spider-Verse and all the rest of it. And the Tobey Maguire films and the Andrew Garfield films and so on. And Venom 2 eventually down the line and all the rest of it. Morbius, I think they're making. Now, the one thing I'm really curious to get to is Spider-Verse again. I'm not going to talk about it now because I've talked about it on other podcasts. But it was a film I enjoyed, but only enjoyed. Whereas everyone's talking like it's the greatest Spider-Man film ever. Mm. And I'm a little bit like that about Spider-Man 2. I think the stuff on the top of the train's really great. I think there's some real kinetic... Spider-Man 2 feels like Sam Raimi with the shackles taken off. In that, like, he gained all the confidence from doing the first one and the studio trusted him. So it's a bit... If you go back... For those of you listening who haven't seen his early stuff, it sounds obvious, but it's only obvious to me and Chris because we're of a certain fucking age and we've seen them. But go and watch the first 2 Evil Dead films. And you'll see how Sam Raimi is with a camera. He's just really inventive with movement and angle and everything else. And you start seeing that with like the train stuff where Spider-Man's being like dragged along the floor and then he sort of whips up and gets onto the train and everything else. That's Sam Raimi. The Doc Ock, the birth of Doc Ock in the hospital.
Straight out of Evil Dead, that.
That is as Sam Raimi a scene as we've ever seen outside of like the Evil Dead films. But I don't like that Peter Parker. I don't like his relationship with Mary Jane. I think his Aunt May fucking blathers on like a fucking imbecile. Particularly, I'm thinking more of Spider-Man 3, actually. Spider-Man 3, she tells the story, I think it's the story of her husband proposing to her, and she omits no detail. It's just this long, rambling fucking story. So, Spider-Man 2 is good. Spider-Verse is very good. I think both Marvel films have been better than any of it, but I still don't think they've been that amazing. And I can't put my finger on what it is because we have the definitive, for me, Spider-Man. This is Christopher Reeve as Superman. This is Tony Stark as Iron Man. This is Spider-Man for me now. And it's got Samuel L. Jackson in it, and it's got, Maria Hill, and it's got Jake Gyllenhaal, who I've traditionally not liked that much, but I really liked him in this, and it's really good. I gave it a good review, but I've not seen a great Spider-Man film yet. And yet there are people who will argue we've had anything from 2 to 4 great Spider-Man films, and some even count the first one. So some people will have it that the first 2 were great, Spider-Verse is great, and maybe 1 or 2 of these. So there are people out there who will argue we've had 3 to 5 great Spider-Man films. For me, we've had 3 to 5 really, really good ones. And I don't know what it is. Gave it a 4-star review. What's my problem with this film? I
think what it is I'm not including like the ones outside the Marvel universe because I think obviously Spider-Man 2
time ago now as well.
Yeah, Spider-Man with in those films is played by Tobey Maguire, who whines. The Garfield ones obviously were both had its issues.
He was good.
Yeah. I think in terms of the MCU and I think the reason why you're thinking is because he's sharing everything else is kind of that's it. It's inside the Marvel universe, so there's other stuff that isn't just Peter Parker. So if it was just solely Peter Parker with a few sort of references from other MCU movies, you probably would feel better about it. But because not only is like it's centered around the third, well, Homecoming is centered around Tony Stark. It leans on Tony Stark. So,
it made sense for the story. I didn't have a problem
did.
with that. People go, oh, it's just another Iron Man. I'd go, well, in context, all of this is working.
But I think that's what it is. That's like at the back of your mind, you're thinking, I want to see Spider-Man a really great solo Spider-Man adventure. Well, I can say, that's the best Spider-Man.
At the end of the film, because I always thought no one had shot him swinging through New York like Sam Raimi. Watch the last 30 seconds of the first one, for example, even now. Mark Webb did some interesting things with The Amazing Spider-Man in that what he did in the first one of those two films that I've never seen since is show scale. So he managed to show how small Spider-Man was in context of a whole city.
Mm.
So there are shots where Spider-Man is just fucking tiny on some roof with a massive city around him. So that was interesting. But the mid-credits on this film has him swinging around Manhattan. And Manhattan has changed a little bit since we last saw it in terms of like there are some new landmarks and stuff and bits and pieces that probably weren't there before. And then he stops and he's watching the big screen and it's J. Jonah Jameson and all the rest of it. And suddenly that felt like the Spider-Man film I wanted. So I think there's an element of he was out of his environment. That was good for the film in that if you want to bond a group of characters quickly, take them out of their natural environment because they're around each other all the time. If they're just at school during the day and half of that is lessons anyway, you can do it much better on a school trip. But I want to see Spider-Man swinging around Manhattan again, and I don't think we've seen an awful lot of that from this continuity. Yeah, and I think also it's the fact that, see, what we assume may no longer be the case. Spider-Man has always been the biggest character in the Marvel, not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Marvel. Some X-Men fans would have, some arguments with me over that, I'm sure, in terms of a property. But Spider-Man is like the king of Marvel. I'm wondering how much I can say that's the case now when you've had the Marvel Cinematic Universe and a whole generation would give that to like Cap or Iron Man or something like that. But Spider-Man is meant to be like the main man. So there is an element of you've brought Batman in and then made him a supporting character.
Yeah.
So I think there might be an element of that. I don't mind he's got to play with others, but I think I needed to see a more traditional film in his natural environment, which is swinging around Manhattan. All the school stuff works. I think the dynamic with his school friends works really well. I certainly don't mind Happy popping in. I certainly don't mind Nick Fury popping in. I don't tend to like characters out of their natural environment generally. It really, really worked for this film. But I just feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has just ended without actually giving us a traditional Spider-Man adventure at all.
Yeah.
Because the next one, he's going to be uncovered because his secret identity's been given away. And I'm just thinking, couldn't we just have had one of Peter Parker struggling with his life, secretly Spider-Man, fighting crime in New York? You could have done that inside the MCU with most of the stuff we've already got here. You didn't have to sacrifice that much.
What's kind of funny is though, had like Marvel done that and then it went to switch to Sony, and then Sony made this decision, everyone would be. I can just imagine like Twitter going on, "Oh my god, Sony, what have you done? Oh, typical Sony making the wrong decisions."
Yeah,
but well. Marvel done this, so
I mean, this is for the film itself. It's really good. I can't give a shit about Mysterio's plot, but he's good enough in it.
They did really well. I think they nailed Mysterio really well.
They did. There's only one scene he clunks in when he cons Parker into giving him Edith.
Yeah,
he's kind of faked a bar basically, and when that finishes, he does like a long monologue. to a load of people, Tony Stark and others have pissed off in the past, it seems, including the guy from the very first Iron Man that Obadiah Stane shouted at. Tony Stark built this in a cave.
Yeah.
That guy he's shouting at, who I don't think is bald, but shaves himself bald for the role, was in. But the dialogue in that scene is fucking dreadful. It's like TV standard. But apart from that, I really kind of enjoyed it. All the Ned stuff. I like all the fucking John Hughesy stuff, and I'm not the biggest John Hughes fan, funnily enough, but all the stuff with like the way teenagers are interacting with each other and the life lessons they think they're learning, you know, and we've grown as people and all that shit. When you've just dated someone for a couple of days, it's not, you know.
Yeah.
All of that stuff's really great. Tom Holland's amazing. I mean, I thought it was a bit much maybe shooting someone with a drone because he's pissed you off. But, you know, he didn't mean to, obviously. But all of that was a bit like, all right, what a strange sequence. Marvel have once they've kind of played down and played up the character at the same time, that they followed the Avengers with him. And on the one hand, I looked at it and thought, doesn't that position it as the Ant-Man and the Wasp of this phase in that... or not this phase of the Ant-Man, not Ant-Man and the Wasp. In that, are you saying he's the little comedic fucking palate cleanser now? That's a bit of an insult to your biggest hitter. And then I realised he's the only thing you can follow the Avengers with. Spider-Man. He's the only character iconic enough to actually reassure everyone that there's still big things to come. You know what I mean? So I really enjoyed it. It's funnier than Homecoming. You had JB Smoove, the guy from Curb Your Enthusiasm, as the other teacher. More of the teachers. All that stuff's really funny, and you know, they're witchy kind of like conspiracy theories, and yeah, I need more of this Spider-Man in Manhattan. I want a much more straightforward Spider-Man film. But everything I got, I liked, and Tom Holland is Spider-Man. No, that's it.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it. I mean, as I said before, it felt very unconventional. So obviously, it did feel like, you know, it is generally Spider-Man away from home. And I did like the sort of the playful element of like, oh, you know, keeping Spider-Man in a high school environment, but this time, well, he's school trip this time around. So I thought Jake Gyllenhaal's I think that. What really impressed me was how they actually brought Magneto. So they did something different, but actually made sense in terms of like him as a character and his abilities. Like the stuff like using like drones and using like holograms around that really utilized. Like it's actually made him like a threat and not just like, well, you know, not just like some guy dressed up making some illusions that don't cause any damage or anything. Or just going to look silly. It actually came up with an idea how to make it credible and dangerous at the same time.
Yeah, not just special effects guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and the stuff where it's going in all that weird kind of like hypnotic, like sort of dream-like visions was just really, really well done. And it felt straight out the comic book as well. Like I thought that was pure Mysterio you just brought to life, and that was really great. I'm not sure how well Spider-Man would survive getting hit by a train, but he did.
Yeah, unless under that suit he does have that sort of spider's exoskeleton thing. I mean, he's pretty resilient. I mean, even back in Spider-Man 2, he fell a hell of a distance onto his back at one point, which was an in-joke to do with him nearly being replaced by Jake Gyllenhaal, funnily enough. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the Spider-Man series, which is only a handful away now. It's a series I'm a bit iffy about covering, only in that I want to cover it. I mean, we've talked about it and we all want to cover it, but because I don't have the same love for Tobey Maguire, and because I'm a bit concerned I won't get the point with Spider-Verse in time, and I'll be lukewarm on it, and it's a bit like being lukewarm on Jurassic Park. It's just not allowed. You know what I mean? People don't like that. They want you to understand it's amazing, and still, I'm a big boy and I've slagged off better films than that. But in terms of this world, they've got the main man right. They've got the ensemble crew really right. They won't be in place forever because, by definition, all those kids won't go off to the same college. but one or two of them will stick around, I'm sure. Um, the reimagining of Flash Thompson, I like. His whole YouTube stuff and all the rest of it.
Mm.
I don't know how teenagers talk, but maybe a teenager would tell me this is miles off. But it all feels very natural the way they interact with each other. So all the things I like most about it are the non-Spider-Man stuff, really. And I don't think that pays it the greatest compliment in one respect. I like the look and feel of the guy. I thought Happy interacted well. I think all you would lose taking it out of Marvel for this film would be, obviously, I suppose, Nick Fury. But there's other ways to present the Beck thing, and I wouldn't have missed the Skrulls particularly. But Happy giving the lectures about Tony and what Tony saw in him and all the rest of it would go, but otherwise it would be the same film. So there's still hope, but I'm disappointed that within the MCU we didn't get him swinging around Manhattan fighting, Mysterio or whatever.
We did get at the end credits him swinging around Manhattan with MJ, but
that almost made it worse because I thought that's what it would look like now. Brilliant, because the effects have come on a little bit since they've come on a lot since 2002. But I have to say, Raimi did really well with what he had. But so it looks brighter. It looks less processed. It looks more real. It just looks more primary color. I don't know.
And it does feel like the comic as well. Especially like when James Jonah Jameson surprise actually played by the same guy in the original.
Which got a wonderful reaction, but it was quite a flat version of it. I wasn't overly.
Well, again, it was a reimagining. He was doing kind of like almost like an Alex Jones type.
Yeah.
Reimagined, but then next time in the next film,
we'd have needed to see more of him.
Yeah. Next time round, we probably have more scope on that, and who knows? I mean, like it could turn around in the next film because. The way it's set up is a bit question marky, so it could turn out to prove it to all be false and then clear his name,
or
so to speak. Yeah, we don't know.
But his reaction was amazing because it very like the first one. Holy shit! I forget what it was now. I forget what.
But getting his eyes going big as well.
I know. I love all that because that's a very articulate Spidey. That was a little cheat in the comic, really. I don't think his eyes are supposed to move like that, but it was a cheat in the comic. And to be honest, most Spider-Man outfits have worked in live action. I don't think maybe the first Garfield film, but apart from that, they've been all right. But this is just perfect. And I watched that last sequence, and when they said pull it out of the MCU, I thought it was a shame. This is really good. I've sounded mixed on it. It's really, really good. It's just I want something a bit more straightforward Spider-Man. I recognise,
Wow. I think there's probably a better chance to see it next time round. Next Spider-Man film, probably.
Yeah, that's what I want. It's a bit like when they bring back Batman. I want something that feels Batman. I don't want Batman goes to Hawaii. Walking along the beach in his Hawaiian shirt and shorts, but with the towel on.
Project Miami Beach.
Yeah. Operation Miami. Yeah.
Batman Mission to Moscow.
Yeah. So it's not really a critique of this film because it works, and there's some really funny bits in it. I mean, when that guy walks on him and he's got his trousers down with that woman and stuff, it's great. It's really, really good. But it's a shame that Marvel exit before we get to the really good stuff. What we keep getting is really good Spider-Man films. What I really, really want is a great live-action Spider-Man film. And hopefully we'll get one. Well,
there's still a chance you'll get that because everything's set up for that now. So,
still, but when you go to animation to live action, Chris,
cue that, and Disney as well. Let's not forget because they own everything.
I think the best way to honour. Well, we'll start with. There's one more you've seen that I haven't, but we said we pair them. Do you know what? I think a really great way to honour the late, great Robin Williams is...
To recast him as Will Smith?
Paint Will Smith blue. What's Aladdin like?
God, that film got a lot of shit when the trailer came out, didn't it?
But it was more I think it was more the sort of Entertainment Weekly kind of magazine covers of it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? It actually wasn't bad at all. Uh, you know, again, my main criticism is largely aimed at. I'll probably attach this to Lion King as well, as well as say films like Beauty and the Beast, which is when you consider the original, um, what place does this have? Do you know what I mean? Like with watching this as a new film, fresh eyes, you'd think, okay, you just it'd just be a bit of a weird experience had you know nothing about the original. If you didn't know this was like a live action version of an animated film, it would seem like a very odd thing, I imagine, and that's the thing I just keep thinking of. It only kind of works in context with the original, which you know is a bit of a weird odd thing, and that's what I think about the new Lion King and the Beauty and the Beast and all these other live action things we seem to be getting now. And yeah, I mean, but apart from that, it's actually quite get. Will Smith's actually really good. It's actually perfect casting. There's actually quite some sweet natured moments in it as well, and the old leads are pretty good. The girl who plays Jasmine is really great in it. Though at the beginning she does seem to sort of just find it okay just to sort of take. I mean, I've not seen the original in a while, so I can't remember. But at the beginning, Jasmine decides to take some bread or something off a market store and just give it to someone who's starving, and not think to pay the guy, even though she's the fucking princess or anything. Just think, oh no, I'm the princess. It's like, hey, and of course the guy selling the bread is pissed off. It's like, hey, who the fuck do you think you know? And she just sort of like think, starving children, like, what are you gonna do? It's like, hang on, you can't just take shit.
Not only that, if you're starving and someone shoplifts for you, you just think, I could have fucking done that.
What example are you setting, princess? Like,
the problem I have with the original Aladdin, once I realised that Aladdin himself, when he smiled, looked like a publicity still of Alan Partridge circa knowing me, knowing you, I couldn't shift that image from my head, so I just saw Aladdin as Alan Partridge, and that fucked it up for me, so I couldn't watch it.
I think I could just see him like, so I'm trying to do a joke with one of his guests on Know Me, Know You, saying a whole new world. A whole new world.
Stick a chance. Hang on a minute. What year was Aladdin? 1990?
Knowing me, knowing you. Aha!
I'm just going to find an image. If I find an image, if I don't, I don't. But there's a way he sort of like cocks one eye and smiles that actually looks a bit like Alan Partridge in publicity stills for like Knowing Me, Knowing You. So I think that's the point with both of these films, really, and we sort of address them together. I haven't seen Aladdin and have no particular intention to. I'm not anti the idea. I mean, if I was with someone who said, "Here we go, can we watch this?" Yes, of course, no problem with watching it. What's the lead character called? Oh, he's called Aladdin. I thought, yeah, of course he is. Thinking of other films, so that's actually it's titular. Okay. When I think of this era of Disney, so I think a lot of what we ascribe to it in terms of partly it's nostalgia. I think there's like other films I always talk about, GoldenEye, First Contact, all the ones you've heard me talk about before. There's a generation now of adults who are now parents themselves who grew up on this stuff, so they ascribe to it a higher quality than was actually there. And also the current generation of like film critics and stuff like that grew up on this stuff. Hence, rank the Star Trek films, First Contact always appears way higher than it deserves because nostalgia and stuff. And we've explained that on other shows. Don't at us here because we've explained that in a lot more depth somewhere else. But I honestly believe they made Beauty and the Beast, and that was a great film, the 1991
Mm.
version, and then coasted a bit off that. It almost became de facto a new golden age for Disney. And for a period of 3 or 4 years, everything they released was like lauded, no matter how good it was. And that applies really to The Lion King. Whisper it, I don't think The Lion King's that great a film. The original version, I mean. The reason I say that is it's the one Disney film I can think of that has no fucking Act 2. I mean, I was actually stunned on first viewing. I went to see it. I took my cousin, who was a 5. It was the first film she ever saw at the cinema, and she loved it, which is great. Which means it met its target audience. It did its job. It's by definition very good. The voices were great, James L. Jones and all the rest of it. There was a lot I liked about it. The songs were very memorable, but all the things that happen that end up with his father dying, he goes into exile, meets a couple of people. They're not people, but Timon and Pumbaa. They start singing, and by the end of that song, he's an adult. And I literally sort of did a double take at the screen. Like in 1994, I was like, what happened to the fucking story? Right? And a few minutes later, he's heading back to like take his crown back. And I thought, what happened to the second act of this film? And then I saw that the remake had half an hour longer on the running time. So I thought, it's going to flesh out Act 2, isn't it? No. It's actually a joke in the film that, like, you've just grown 400 pounds in one song. Don't get me wrong, I don't think The Lion King is a bad film. What I'm saying is that you put it up against the best half a dozen Golden Age Disney films, and I think it's found wanting. And I think a lot of it is you bought into this being a golden age that went right through like Pocahontas and Mulan and stuff like that. That actually Beauty and the Beast was a great film, and this coasted its sort of coattails. I think it's oversold by such great voices, mainly James L. Jones and Jeremy Irons, to be honest. There were some nice little meta things, like it was James L. Jones and Mads Sinclair. So basically, the king and queen of Zamunda are the king and queen of the Pride Lands. And the animation's nice, the song's nice. It's a good film, but it's a film missing an act. And so when I went into the remake, it gave me a new appreciation for the original. The reason I say that is the remake throws on half an hour to no regard whatsoever. It doesn't add anything. In fact, I don't know where the half hour came from. They must have just literally wasted some more time on scenes, because I can't find any fat on it, but I can't find all the bits that have been added. There's an extra couple of jokes, and that's about it. It's the same film, but the problem is the reason I say I've got more respect for the original now is how much expressiveness was put into those animals' faces in the 2D sort of cell animation. Scar is actually pretty well animated in this version, but he's really kind of memorable to look at in the original. You know, he's every bit as iconic as like a Cruella de Vil or something like that.
Well, Scar in this film is the only one that's like drastically different, and I think the one in the remake is the only one that actually that has something different and has like a different take on it, really. And both actually work in the context of their own film. You know,
He's the only one. Well, he's one of the few where the voice matches the body. Because it's very strange, the voices coming out of those animals when you stop to think of it. On the plus side, when they're kittens, I don't know that you call big cats kittens, but we'll go with it. When they're, cubs, yeah, maybe. They move like kittens. I've had kittens. I've got a kitten. Well, she's a fully grown cat now, but I've got a cat who was a kitten, and she moved like that when she was a baby. So some of the attention to there is not a single frame of this film that has a flaw in terms of its visuals, and even something like the Avengers will have the odd one. So on a technical level, superb, but almost too good, because animals' faces are not as expressive as animated animals' faces. a human face can do an awful lot more than a cat's face. So a lot of emotion's been lost. Silly little things that make me wonder how much attention they were paying. They sing "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" in the middle of the day.
No, I didn't even pick up on that, but yeah.
Middle of a fucking heat wave. Can you feel the love tonight? I don't know. Let's wait till tonight. The voices make more sense in that I'm not making a racial point here, but it does make sense that everybody of a familial relation is the same race, because you can sort of tell the difference. Donald Glover.
Yeah, I suppose if they were doing it live action as well, they treated it as if it was live action.
Well, James Earl Jones. Here's my son, Matthew Broderick. It doesn't, and his mother, Madge Sinclair.
Yeah, but that's the thing with animation, though. You have
It doesn't matter as much.
Because you even have the idea that in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder was voiced by the same guy who played Uncle Phil. So you play a big, huge black guy playing like a guy from Japan.
But I mean, the big
so you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. The big box office example of that is Zippy and George were done by the same person, which is why at the end of Rainbow, George's goodbye is always a minute later. Like a couple of seconds afterwards. Goodbye. He says it afterwards because it's the same guy having to do both voices.
I did not know that.
There you go.
That's a fun fact.
Fun fact. So that made some sense. Donald Glover. If they're doing all their own singing, he's a better singer than Matthew Broderick as well, which you would expect. No Madge Sinclair anymore. Doesn't lose a lot from that. It's Alfred Woodard instead. Chiwetel Ejiofor, good. I mean, I think the one... James Earl Jones and Jeremy Irons are the two irreplaceable elements, really. I mean, the one line that lines up is when Scar says, "Kill him." That's way more chilling in the original. But that could be a mixture of things in terms of the animation and the way it's all put together. It doesn't add very much. Some of the voices are better, some are worse. Most are similar. I preferred, I can't remember the name of the character, but the one that's John Oliver this time, not Rowan Atkinson. That's less distracting. That's way less distracting because Rowan Atkinson is so fucking standout in terms of what he sounds like. Pumbaa, perfect as Seth Rogen. Timon, that's the one character where if I'd not seen the original, I'd know who did the original because he's doing a Nathan Lane impression. But what I'm talking about is all the little constituent parts. It's the same film, bit longer, less emotion in the faces. End of story. Don't know why they bothered. And I thought, in a 2-hour film, let's at least see like a fleshed out Act 3. Let's see him grow up with these people a bit. No, he grows up in a song.
Things of the animation one, there's a lot more interesting stuff happening in the set pieces and things like that. Where here they're kind of like confined to a natural setting, so that there's less things you do. Like in the original, you got like Scar doing the "Be Prepared," and you got all like the kind of like fascism kind of elements, where you got like sort of the hyenas doing like, marching like, or he's like sort of stood across so he's like the emperor kind of thing.
That's the Nazi imagery Becca mentioned, and I didn't get what she was getting at. 'Cause I've only ever seen the original Lion King twice. That is the caveat I should have mentioned at the start. I saw it in the cinema and I watched it again about a year or two ago.
And you got like sort of like green gas like sort of popping up all over the place as like, Scar's like leaping from ledge to ledge. Whereas this, it's just
real
Scar.
world.
It's just Scar literally just like just climbing a rock. Just and I mean, but that said, Scar is the best part of this in comparison, because in the original it's Jeremy Irons and it's very camp, but his Scar is motivated more by vanity, where he's a bit more like
he's drawn vain.
Yeah, he's very so he's very
but
camp.
If you're talking about an animated take, it's no coincidence I mentioned Cruella de Vil. So in live action, you've probably got to do something different.
Yeah, so he's like very much like me, Scar. I should be king. As if this like kind of like it's that kind of entitlement because he just thinks, well, I'm just better than everyone else. Whereas there, it's very much more spiteful.
Yeah.
It's very
And
much like,
this one looks a bit matted, and he has got some scars on him as well.
and they've implied that it kind of like from a fight with Mufasa as well. So it felt very much like a
Well, Mufasa has a couple of little marks on his side as well. They did the attention to detail is laudable. These are animals that live in the wild. They've been in the odd scrape, all of them. So, and the other thing I felt, and it sounds obvious, is I really felt the fucking heat. It felt like they were in under a very unforgiving sun. So I didn't hate it, but they've added half an hour to not fix the bit of the original film that doesn't work, which is he goes into exile, gets a bit bigger, comes right back again. They needed to do something a bit more with that, but the main problem is animals just don't emote in the same way.
yeah.
But it's fucking flawless to look at.
Well, that was going to be my last point on this. Really, is the fact that at the end of the day, even though this film is pretty much like a pointless film, essentially, it may not be entirely pointless because it could be an excuse for an exercise to show what we can actually do. They could probably take this. I don't know what you call it, like sort of special effect or
This
kind of like
technology.
this
Well, we'll just
technology, yeah, and do something really amazing with it. Like you could probably, this will probably be used now in the future to come, with regards to like sort of animals on screen with humans.
Well, they didn't even the environment, Chris. What amazed me was I thought they at least shot it in Africa. I thought they at least went and got all the plates and then digitally drew in all the animals. They didn't. It's all digital.
So it does add extra to that. So maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's not entirely pointless. Maybe it's, but
Yeah. What it missed was some narration by David Attenborough.
yes.
Can you feel the fanny tonight?
God, he's a dirty old bugger, isn't he? Attenborough guy.
It's all fannies with David Attenborough in it.
But no one seems to sort of think that. No one seems.
No one else has heard it. But yeah, they're both a bit redundant, but neither unenjoyable.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with The Lion King, because that's the other thing. People knee-jerk against remakes. People went in hating it. It's The Lion King. It's not that different. But it is a little bit redundant. And like I say, in animation, you can just do a little bit more with faces and general feel. And as I say, there's something about Scar that works better as basically a feline Cruella de Vil.
Yeah. And also Jeremy Irons just hams it up brilliantly.
Let's go to a property where none of the leads have any vanity whatsoever.
What, Fast and Furious franchise?
Yes.
Hobbs and Shaw.
So just before this came out, that article came out about how they can never lose a fight, any of the leads in the Fast and Furious franchise, and how you had Vin Diesel's sister on set with this scoring method he's written, like a roundhouse kick is worth this point and a punch is worth this, and how it had to be a draw at worst and things like that.
It's got down to a fine art, that, hasn't it?
It's fucking ridiculous. It really is. Well, you can't lose a fight. Look at any of the great action stars of the past. There was, their fate was in the balance sometimes, but there you go. Hobbs and Shaw, I'll go first on this one. I think this is the weakest Fast and Furious film since about for 10 years. I need a rewatch of 8 though to be sure on that. I've got problems with 7 and 8 to be honest. But 7 you forgive because Paul Walker.
Yeah.
They took an extra year. Nearly every time you see Paul Walker in that film, it's digitally fucked around with. He either wasn't there or the face replacements aren't many, but there are there though. there's scenes where he sat in a chair and he said, well, Paul wasn't actually in that chair, or he was in a different chair somewhere else, and we've digitally moved him there, or we've put him in the scene and he wasn't actually there. And there's scenes where he's on the phone to Jordana Brewster's character, I've forgotten her name, his wife, basically. And they were saying she shot her bit a year later. So he's recorded his bit and she's talking to like a dead man. Do you know what I mean, effectively? But it had loads of heart. And yes, it's homoerotic as fuck, them looking at each other before they drive off in different directions. But it landed. That had real heart, him and Dom saying goodbye to each other at the end. So for all its problems at 8, that's plenty of heart. But the series peaked for me with 5 and 6. 5 specifically, actually, because it's like a significantly dumber Ocean's 11, but the action's really good. It brought The Rock in; he was really good. The actors were kind of all at their peak. The crew hadn't got ridiculously big yet. I mean, it was getting big, but they've added characters since, and you've now got like characters where 2 of them have the same skill set, and they haven't really thought that through. So the last Fast and Furious film I watched where I wasn't really that impressed was the 4th, which is 2009, so a decade. The thing with Hobbs and Shaw is, I don't know what it is, because it was enjoyable enough.
Yeah.
It really was, and there was something about the way they shot their exchanges I didn't like. There's a bit where they meet up and have an argument right at the start, and they just plonk the 2 actors opposite each other and then take turns pointing at the camera at them while they insult each other. And Jason Statham is moving his arms too much. It's like he's doing a bit of fucking performance art on stage or something.
Yeah.
It looks a bit silly, and it's a bit lazy, and it's just lazy. It's just lazy. Let's just, they're opposites, and they, but they're really alike, because watch how they eat breakfast. It's all the same sort of beats, but my biggest problem with the film, we'll talk about the detail in a minute, I suppose, but my biggest problem with the film is it's fucking miles too long. They go to Moscow at one point, and at the end of that Moscow sequence is sort of tonally where the film's really meant to end. Do you know what I mean? But there's a whole act to come, and it's in Samoa, which again seems to be ego stroking as well. Like, we'll do one in your cultural home, Dwayne. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That section of the film is miles too long. Ladles on the family stuff ridiculously. Ladles on the all-action hero thing again, because he holds a helicopter down with his one arm. And that's my problem with it. I just think the film is just too long. It massively outstays its welcome. Them playing off each other is only funny in moments. There's a couple of funny cameos in the film, and the bit around them getting on the plane is funny. My cock's small. That wasn't me making an announcement, listeners. So that's a character thing in the film.
Mike.
Why did you stop to tell everyone your cock's small, Dave, during the show? I mean, it is, but that's not what I was announcing right now. But that bit was funny. But I just thought it was a bit patchy. I thought it was not always in on its own joke, because with a completely straight face, they used to play together as brother and sister when they were kids. They're 21 years apart in age.
Actors, that is.
Yeah, the actors. But the main problem with the film, apart from the length, is the constant stream of insults at each other gets tired. It's just like, that's quite funny once you've shot it clumsily, but all right. I actually think it's quite a badly shot film. And none of the action's that gripping. One of the things to point out to anyone who hasn't seen it is, obviously, it's a Fast and Furious spin-off. So the first thought is, well, it's still going to be based around cars. There isn't a car chase until like 15 minutes in, sorry, and it's not that impressive. So,
is that the one in London where, like, Stath's driving?
The one in the McLaren that they would not fit in. If you get the measurements of a McLaren and then the measurements of those 2 men's chests, they wouldn't both fit in the car. Literally, they both wouldn't fit in that McLaren. But yeah, that's all I really want to say for a minute, apart from to respond to anything you might want to say about it.
I mean, I think I enjoyed it more than you did, but I get what you're saying, because I don't think it was as good as it could have been. But probably a tad too long.
it did belabour one joke, which is these two just plain don't get along.
Yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, one of the things that struck me out was just how irritating Ryan Reynolds was in this film. Like, as soon as he came on, I was like,
Well,
"Oh, you
I
like."
felt
It felt very much like I'm trying to do my Deadpool thing, but it's just like, actually, no, you're really, really great in this time around.
I felt like I was in an alternate universe where Kevin Hart entertained me and Ryan Reynolds got on my tits.
Yeah. What is this sort of style world?
I am not as big a Deadpool fan as some. Now, to repeat the point I've made in previous years, when I first watched Deadpool, I laughed my ass off. I thought it was really funny, right? But the problem is, about 5 months later, I watched it again and didn't laugh once. And it wasn't that it was suddenly a bad film. It was that, I got the joke the first time. That's it. And when I went to watch Deadpool 2, I couldn't wait for it to fucking finish. It was doing my fucking nuts. I hated the second one. It felt 3 hours long, and it's not. And it's actually probably not particularly much worse than the first one, although they do try and play up him learning and being part of a team. It's like, Deadpool shouldn't learn a fucking thing. You know what I mean? It's just, he's a one-dimensional character. Just play on that. But of course, David Leitch directed one of the Deadpool films, for the second one. On that basis, I would have thought I'd have got better action than this.
Yeah.
It's green screen as fuck. It's really lazy. When you think, last summer we had Mission Impossible. This year we've had John Wick. And then this film comes out and they look permanently against green screens. I mean, some of it I wouldn't necessarily expect them to do because not everyone's Tom Cruise. But when they're running down the side of that, when he's running down the side of that skyscraper while Stephen comes down in a lift, that looks like something from the early 2000s. That has got that slightly vanilla colouring you get on like one of the first Spider-Man films or something. I didn't dislike it. It went on too long, and 3/4 of the way through the film, it's still, lazily written insults shot with Statham waving his arms around like he's, I don't know.
It felt very much like a new Fast and Furious, but without Vin Diesel this time around. It was just more focused on Rock and Statham, which is fine by me. I think the things that didn't really work was the romance felt a little bit like I don't know.
Was there a romance?
Rock can do many things, but I'm not sure. I think he can sell us that he's in a relationship, but getting that initial
into one in the first place
is a bit like in San Andreas, like being like or something for the role where he's already married. You're fine, but the romance just seemed just a bit awkward. Even though Vanessa Kirby, I was actually quite impressed by her in this.
I'm impressed by Vanessa Kirby and everything so far.
Yeah,
I like her.
She generally like kind of came through in this film. She handled the action quite well. She had quite good repartee with everyone in the film, particularly when she's like when Rock's like sort of ordering the guy to sort of like, if she moves, shoot her in the face, and she's like, no,
she's got a massive credibility thing to jump.
Yeah,
she is 21 years older than someone that in flashbacks when they're a kid, they're more or less the same age. So they have got to generate chemistry.
Yeah,
because it's silly, it's not. The filmmakers know we know they're not, but you're going to have to generate chemistry. Convince me these are brothers and sisters, and they did it, or rather, she did it.
Yeah, and yeah, it's really good when she's like saying, "No, sorry, can't do that. Not allowed. Sorry." I thought, yeah, you've got this. So she blended in well with the team. Well, obviously, the whole thing is about family. Being a Fast and Furious film.
And didn't it ladle that on in the final?
Yeah, it's obviously it's about
How dare you come back here after what you pulled? What did he pull? Well, put away our father. Why? He was a criminal. All right then.
And you buggered. Well, it's like both Hobbs and Shaw did something to protect their families that got them kind of like mistrusting them in some way. It's basically
Yeah.
basically that was like the
I've
thing.
done things I'm not proud of, he says while waving his hands around.
Like Kill Han.
Yeah, that's the first thing I was going to say. Han.
You know what? So I saw it on Twitter. I think it was on Twitter anyway, where someone said like, Fast and Furious franchise is basically like a big American soap opera. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that Han and Giselle weren't actually killed. They're just actually working deep undercover on some mission. I was like, you know what?
What if Han's that voice? What if Han's running that organisation?
You say because he does know one of them, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. The only thing is, that's never resolved. So when you sit and think about, right, I understand the flaw in what I'm about to say. So anyone listening, do you really expect to think on a Fast and Furious film? Yeah, I get that. I get they're a bit silly. But plots are still supposed to happen. They're still supposed to go from point A to point B. There's still supposed to be a bunch of coherent stuff that happens that's relatively consistent with itself. Not clearing up who runs that organisation at the end was odd. Suddenly introducing another virus at the end was odd. Ryan Reynolds, clearly they only had him for a day because he's only ever on one set. And he grates like fuck. Kevin Hart's really good for the bit he's in. I liked his bit. It wasn't too much. The whole getting on the plane stuff was the best bit of the film. The action was disappointing. Jason Statham waved his arms around too much. I don't know what that was about because I've never noticed him doing it before. And that's it. Bottom line. Bottom half Fast and Furious for me. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And actually, as serious as he takes himself, as not in on the joke, and as rampant paging an ego as he is, this series is actually better with Vin Diesel in it. It felt like a side act. It is a side act, but it felt like one. It felt like just off camera somewhere was like the main people doing stuff, and we're not watching it. We're watching these people who've been relegated to the B team. It was enjoyable enough, but it was almost ruined by its length because I was enjoying it. They got to the end of their spell at Moscow, and I remember thinking this is actually almost a perfectly paced film. Because I'm so sensitive to pacing, I'm often mentally checking that stuff. And then they went off to Samoa, and by the end I was like, will you just fucking finish? And that's where I am with it. I think it's weaker Fast and Furious, but ever since 5, it's all entertaining. Yeah. I don't think we'll ever get another third or fourth entry where they were either, well, even 2 was terrible. 2 was probably the worst, actually. But by 3 and 4, they were actually a bit boring as well, and they're never that now. But who
knows? I mean, we'll see what the next one's. But I mean, no doubt probably going to do another one. So
yeah.
So I guess we'll just wait and see.
Well, 9 is being filmed now, but obviously, if you mean another spin-off, they kind of finished this film like they were teasing another one.
Yeah, because obviously we still don't know who, Dr. Claw is for whatever this organisation he wants, the New World Order or some sort.
Baron Greenbank.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just going to look up. It didn't.
I bet it turns out to be like one of the brothers or something that they used to. Yeah. When he used to live when they were adopted or something. I don't know.
It's grossed a shade under 600 million, and that's pretty much at the end of its run. So it's not as hard hitting as the main saga, but they did spend 200 million on it. But I think on balance they'll be relatively happy with that. Idris Elba's another one who keeps playing the same sort of role, but it's all right. Again, are they pushing it a bit too far? I don't know. Take it on its own terms. It's okay.
But yeah, it was absolutely fine. It was, it's perfect. Summer entertainment.
Yeah. But like I say, it was 135 minutes. Had it been 105 minutes, I think we'd have been about perfect.
Yeah. Though I definitely know what you felt because I felt like that. When we got to the end of the Moscow, I was thinking, oh, it's wrapping up now.
Yeah.
I had that sudden feeling of, oh, hang on, this feels like it's wrapping up now. But I know there's a bit coming up in. I know there's another act to come. So.
I didn't know they were going to Samoa. It is almost like it's got a fourth act.
Yeah.
And the only other film I've really seen that in was that fourth Transformers film, and I'm thinking that's not a flattering comparison. They played off each other quite nicely. I just wish those exchanges. Do you remember when we covered Captain Marvel in the bit where his eye was scratched and afterwards he said, "I'll be all right"?
Yeah.
And Ben Mendelsohn shook his head
Yeah.
like no, and both of us said how badly shot that was.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with the line. There's nothing wrong with the shaking your head. There's nothing wrong with it in conception. Just something about when you looked at it went, you've just fluffed that.
Yeah.
The bit where they first put opposite each other and they're taking in turns to do their shit talking.
Yeah.
And Statham is sort of...
It's not your face, it's your voice.
But it's so badly shot that. And Statham is waving his hands around and it's just... But it's like he's trying to make a serious point with his hands. It's not wildly gesticulating. It's kind of emphasis. And I just think, Jason, you are better when you realise that you are kind of the joke. And I don't mean that to be nasty. I just mean the more serious you take it, the less effective you tend to be. And despite the fact that was a comedic sequence, Statham was just taking it way too seriously. But yeah, it's okay. Only a couple left to go.
Oh, only two more left, folks. One of we've already kind of reviewed in full. Coming soon, I believe.
Let's do that. Let's do that one last then. Let's go out of sequence and do the last one first.
Oh, what, Angel Has Fallen?
Let's finish on a higher note. Let's do Angel Has Fallen first.
Okay, so Angel Has Fallen. I thought. Well, I was actually quite surprised by this one. Now, all the Fallen series. Olympus and even London Has Fallen. I'm a bit of a sucker for just a pretty generic balls out action film with a lot of cheesy one lines and just blatant violence. I'm absolutely happy right at home with watching that. I agree,
although I prefer balls in.
Yes. But yeah, I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by this. This was a bit toned in. This kind of like almost like knew its limits and kind of knew what it had to do and did it very well. And I mean, yeah, apart from a few weird stabs at humour, which just fell out of the blue, particularly in a surprisingly post-credit sequence. This was actually pretty
baffling.
Yeah, it's pretty decent for the most part. I mean, but the other thing I kept reminding me of, this is kind of like the Fallen series. Feels like it's like a whole season of 24 compacted into 2 hours.
Yes.
And I think that's what I felt by watching this. Thought, this is kind of similar to 24, and I think that's probably what I like about it. So what do you think?
Well, on the first ones, Olympus Has Fallen, I just thought was a real generic Die Hard knockoff. I mean, it's become a cliche in itself, Die Hard knockoff. But the one man against a ton of terrorists or all that, generally in one building, that sort of thing. But the problem with it was, for me, is it reminded me of the Taken series, in that the Taken series had this tendency to try and give us backstory but not feel that committed to it. So, they just give him some generic character name, Brian. Right, we'll call him Brian. All right, what's Brian doing tonight? He's having a beer and a barbecue with his friends, and they're going to reminisce about some, the good old days. And what's he doing now? Well, he's teaching his daughter to drive. Brilliant, fantastic. No one cares about any of that shit at all. And I felt like that way about the sort of Has Fallen series, in that you've got this Mike Banning character, and he's just bland as fuck. And they keep trying to give him like kiss-off lines, and they're shit. All of them. They've just not been at all funny. So even though the film's trying to be funny, it plays like a film with no sense of humour whatsoever. It might as well have been played really po-faced. And well, let's have a game of fuck off. It's like that doesn't even work as a fucking line at all. And then we get to London.
I did enjoy that line.
I know you've always enjoyed that line, and I didn't pick it up to troll you particularly.
I know.
I've got to say what I think, and that line's terrible. What do you like about it? But anyway,
I like it because it is. I like it because it's just so blatantly just like.
Let's say something here that's got strong language in it and is an insult because we're adult.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm trying to sort of
It's something like a 15-year-old would write that.
it is definitely, and that's
Yeah.
kind of part of it. I'm trying to articulate it, but it's very much just like, oh, just fuck off. But in this kind of, I don't know, it's in a kind of very upfront kind of like, oh fuck it, let's just have a laugh with it.
So we got through that, and there were things I didn't like in it. I don't know, but I haven't really got a lot more to say about that one, to be honest. It's like any other film, 25 years earlier or 20 years earlier, Under Siege. Same quality of film, same. Because a lot of people in our generation really like it. Not so much now; it's died off. But when we were younger, Under Siege was a popular film. Always thought it was terrible, but London Has Fallen, by contrast, I loathed. I hated it. First off, the action was really fucking muddy. It was a feature-length version of that bit in Tomorrow Never Dies where Brosnan is just waving a machine gun round on that boat, and he's just indiscriminately. It's like it's Raid. It's like he's spraying bugs. He's just randomly spraying a few bullets here and there to make sure. The action in that film was like it. The amount of gunplay in it didn't offend me, but it was just silly. It just lost all impact as a result. And I thought some of the way they expressed themselves, it was like parody Americans. It was like that parody of parts of the country that I've never been anywhere, fear anyone different, and all that sort of thing. So it's a bit like, fuck Hedistan. That's just a parody of like fear of Muslims and stuff like that. And it's not to be overthought, I get that, but it's a little bit offensive actually. You don't fucking need that. And I just thought it was lazy. I thought the whole fucking thing was lazy. The camaraderie they were trying to build between him and the president was a bit false and forced. But then I suppose a bit like 24, Jack and David Palmer had that to some degree.
Yeah.
But it was always a bit more distant and respectful than that.
Well, with 24, you've got 24 episodes to kind of.
Yeah, but it was always a bit more distant and respectful. But anyway, so I didn't really like the action. Didn't really like the plot. Didn't care about the personal stuff. They made his wife pregnant and all the rest of it, and it was like, I don't care. I really don't care. So we come to this one, and I went for something to do. I thought this is going to be dreadful. I saw trailers to it, and again, that felt a bit of... I felt crestfallen, delighted at the same time. Crestfallen because there is something about when you run out of ideas, like frame the leading man. So I did feel that was a bit, but at least it was, and I thought I've seen this before. It's going to be like when Vantage Point presented itself as this grand new idea, forgetting Kurosawa got there years before. 3 Days of the Condor was something we talked about on the other show fairly recently. The original Mission Impossible, framing the leading man at the scene of the crime, and then having go on the run to clear his name is quite a well-worn device. But at least it's something different. At least it isn't stick him in another building, in another city, So that was different. But all of a sudden, it's located a sense of humour. Most of the time, that works. The stuff with him and his dad works quite well. Him and Nick Nolte, who's spectacularly... He's everything you think Nick Nolte is from Nick Nolte's mugshot.
Yeah.
Spectacularly eccentric and not quite all there anymore. It's amazing to go back and watch Cape Fear and think it's the same man. He was quite together and with it in the late 80s and early 90s, but then he sort of lost the plot, about 10, 15 years ago. No, a bit longer than that, actually, because he lost it before Hulk. About 20 years ago, he lost the plot again. But it's quite good, and the family stuff actually works a bit better this time, and it's all through the prism of cliche. Like he meets his old military friend and they do nothing but reminisce. That's a cliche. The telling the wife who wasn't there in those days stories, all of which make the leading man seem like a top guy. That guy being a traitor. Actually, the vice president being a traitor. It's all kind of very predictable, very cliched. The dialogue's still not great, but it's better. It's all a step up. The action's a little bit less indiscriminate. It's a little bit more varied. The guy's injured, and whilst they're a bit like the Brosnan Bond era, they don't commit to it in the same way as perhaps they could. It does keep coming back, this problem that he's got a problem in his neck and back. He's getting migraines. They do affect him at different points. Gerard Butler looks older now, and he's put on a little bit of weight as well. So it does feel like a man nearing the end of his time, and they focus it into the story. Again, the Bond analogy, it's not Roger Moore's Bond. Well, what do we do? He's in his late 50s. Have him fuck even more women. It's no, acknowledge he's aging and he's got decisions to make about his future. It pays off some of the stuff from the first two films about how trusted he is by the president and the vice president, as he was in he was vice president in the first two films.
No, I think it was chairman. I think or something.
He was vice president in the second film anyway. I
Was
don't know
he?
about the first one. I thought he was vice president in both. He certainly was in the second one. I think he might have been.
He was Speaker of the House in the first one, but he might have been vice in
Well,
the...
Speaker of the House is third in line anyway. They must have killed the vice president in the first one. I can't remember. So he would have assumed the vice presidency then. So, yeah, I saw London Has Fallen within the last sort of 2 weeks, and he was definitely vice president in that. So he's done best out of these films. He's been promoted twice. But the family stuff actually drew me in. Not wildly, but suddenly like it felt real, as in not leave a blank place in the script and we'll put some family stuff in. Like, let's have Brian do a barbecue. It's not like that. The action's not as indiscriminate. The casual racism has fucking disappeared of the second film. Or the just... ignorance is probably a better word than racism. Just the total fucking boneheaded ignorance of the script. It's the best of the three by a distance for me. That makes it like a 3-star film, but the first two were crap and the second one was really crap. So I liked it.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think I don't know. I keep meaning to actually rewatch them, especially Olympus, because there's so much fucking destruction in that fucking film. It's unbelievable.
I haven't seen the competing one. I haven't seen White House Down.
Oh yeah, White House Down. Yeah.
But that's largely because it's a Roland Emmerich film. He's another one that I wouldn't use his fucking, I wouldn't scratch my balls on him.
Well, that kind of does the same sort of thing, but it has a bit of a lighter tone and it's just a little bit sillier with it.
Okay.
But yeah, I say I was generally, this is a little bit more like a little bit more grounded. I want to say a little bit more less cavalier, a little bit more sensible. Kind of knew what it was, and it's like, you know what? Let's just make just a half decent action film. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And because there is an appetite for this kind of thing as well, so I think this is why it's this. I don't know how well this has done so far, but I reckon it's probably done all right.
Well, it topped the box office. It's only been open like a weekend. As I say, we'll try and turn this show around quickly, so people who listen as soon as things drop. It won't be far out of date because the second weekend grosses won't be out. I think it did 21 million in its opening weekend, a North American box office. 21.3 million, yeah. So it took over from Good Boys the previous week, which had done about the same. But there's a bit near the end of the film where they're fighting on a roof, and the green screen work is quite weak. Now, it's not horrific. It would have passed muster 10 years ago, even. And the reason I say that is, go back and watch the original Avengers now. The effects stand up pretty well, but you can quite often see when it's green screen. So, what was acceptable even half a decade ago is not as good as you remember it being. This film was only in the Wikipedia is saying 40 to 80 million. That's quite a wide range, but even at the top end, that's not expensive. If we take the midpoint and say that's not going to be far away, this film cost about $60 million to make, and it does show. It does show in some of the explosion effects. It does show in some of the green screen work where they're clearly on a soundstage with blue screen or green screen, and it's made to be looking like a roof on top of a building, and it's not. It clearly isn't, but it's not horrific. It's all right, and actually the drone attack early in the film's really very good. Yeah,
it's quite a good concept as well for the drone. It's just kind of
because you can't avoid it. It's like a swarm.
Yeah, and it just kind of like kamikaze target you and dive almost like missiles.
So it's all very predictable. It's a film that's done the same plot several times. I listed a couple of high-profile examples. One of those examples was an early example, and the one we keep mentioning on the other show. But it's a Has Fallen film, so I'm not accusing of it of ripping off 3 Days of the Condor. it's not a talky film, and he turns up and seduces some woman, and they quietly hunker down in their apartment. It's an action film, and it plays like an action film, but its basic premise comes from those sorts of things. But I didn't think this had anything in it as a series. I've so not enjoyed the first two, and I think he'll probably be happy, but I think Gerard Butler's career has been a waste. Because I remember seeing him the first thing I saw him in wasn't chronologically his earliest thing that I saw him in. Forget Tomorrow Never Dies, that's a tiny little, he's in a couple of frames. But I remember seeing him in, because I know since then he was in Dracula, I think it was Dracula 2000 in America and 2001 here. I saw that afterwards, and he was terrible in it, it was terrible. But I first saw him in Cradle of Life, the second Tomb Raider film, the Angelina Jolie one.
Oh yeah.
And that was 2003. He was in that, playing a character called Terry something. I saw that film once at the cinema 16 years ago, didn't like it, and I remember he was called Terry. And I just think like that tells me something. He stood out to me, and I remember thinking he's a potential James Bond to look at and stuff like that. And
funny enough, the guy in the first one was Daniel Craig.
And I picked the wrong one. There was a James Bond in the Angelina Jolie suit, but it wasn't him. But just as a potential, and I thought you're really quite good. Shame you're in this; it's not very good. And then you look at his filmography since, and I think it's largely dreadful. It's largely dreadful. It's not as packed as you might think it is, but it's really quite poor. He's done a mixture of terrible rom-coms and terrible action films and terrible genre stuff.
You're telling me Geostorm wasn't a good film? Come on.
I've not seen Geostorm on the basis that it's a film called Geostorm. He's probably done the odd interesting thing in there because I've not seen everything.
Have you seen that? He did a film with that. Was it like Shakespeare film that Ralph Fiennes did? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if he was any good in that. Mark Kermode made reference to some film he was in that he was... The Vanishing. He made reference to him being really, really good in that. The man's got some talent, but, I mean, the highest profile thing he's ever done outside of this series is probably 300. That's a matter of taste. A lot of people like 300. I think it's awful. I can't stick it.
It's Zack Snyder, isn't it?
It's Zack Snyder. I've got problems with Zack Snyder, full stop. Funnily enough, one of the films he gets such a kicking for is Man of Steel, which I don't hate, but like most of his stuff, I really, really don't like. But you go down and you see stuff like P.S. I Love You, The Ugly Truth, all their poor rom-coms. Then he did Law Abiding Citizen, which is bloody awful. Yeah, I don't need to go on any further. The fact is, he was capable of more than this. And at least his signature series now, I suppose. I'm looking at a really good cast. I mean, Lance Reddick, we haven't mentioned him. Lance Reddick, I've always loved. We know him from John Wick. He was in The Wire for years. He was a lead in that, but we know him recently from, as I say, John Wick. He plays the concierge, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. It was odd actually, because I know that's not his real voice, but I kept hearing his concierge voice from John Wick in this.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
Yeah, it's an accent he puts on for that, but it slips out occasionally, strangely.
I can't remember if it was just like almost like an optical illusion, that type thing, where that's what I kept hearing.
I didn't know. Funnily enough, he was in White House Down. I didn't know that. So he was in the competing product.
I can't remember what he was in that.
I know him from a lot of television. I'm not a massive TV man, but I do remember seeing him in Bosch, which is an Amazon Prime series. He's probably always going to be best known for The Wire. He was in all of that as like the boss, basically. Cedric, I think he was called. So yeah, this guy turns up in everything. So he's there. Morgan Freeman's always great, obviously. Jada Pinkett's all right. I remember the last thing I ever saw her in was Gotham, and I couldn't fucking stick her in that. She's quite good here.
Her character's completely pointless, though.
Yeah, you don't need her at all. She's investigating like she's the cop at the end of Gone Girl or something, and like,
You think she's going to play a part like of actually,
no,
you know,
nothing.
of yeah. You think she's going to actually sort of play a big part in like clearing his name, like uncover like a vital bit of evidence?
If you wanted to cast a seemingly decent man who's clearly a mole and a bit of a villain, Tim Blake Nelson and like Danny Houston would both be in my top 5 choices. So they're really obvious. If you want to cast a kooky off the grid father, Nick Nolte is an obvious casting choice. But they could put a bit more to family. Piper Perabot's actually not bad in it for the little bit she has to do. She's replaced Radha Mitchell in it. Radha Mitchell was in the last one. I can't remember Olympus, it's too long ago, but she definitely played his wife in the last one. But they've done as much as you can do with this very basic format. You know, this is quite lowest common denominator. It's aimed at people who just want to go in and switch their brain off and watch a bit of action. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but within the realms of that, they've actually made most of the bits they sort of contractually have to put in, like the family stuff and the morality stuff and the decision making about the future stuff. They've made all that work. Okay, it's not a bad film.
And speaking of Hollywood, we've already reviewed this anyway, but Tarantino's latest.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm still yet to do my sort of second viewing of it. Now, again, we can't second guess what people subscribe to and where they get what show. I think the majority of people listening to this listen to Do You Expect Us to Talk? It will come out the same weekend. The weekend the show comes out, that show comes out, this will have come out during the week because I'm going to edit this in the next day or two. This will be out by the weekend that show comes out. So they'll come out around the same time. So Do You Expect Us to Talk has a 2-hour, 45-minute review of that film. Obviously, the same usual going off topic and bullshitting we normally do, but there is a significant amount on that show, even once you take all the preambles out. So that's where that show is anyway. So if you want to sort of get the longer thoughts. In terms of what I thought about the film, I'm still sort of forming my thoughts because, as I say, the review will come out and I'm going to go see it again. I'm going to go and see it again this weekend. I think what I will say about the film is 2 or 3 things, and then I'll probably hand over to you. First off, on the negative side, he still misses Sally Menke, I think. This is 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is pretty standard issue Quentin Tarantino now. Hateful Eight was a bit longer, but they're coming in around this point most of the time now. But it just, in the overall piece, I mean, scenes are edited exquisitely. I mean, you know, everything cuts together well. But just, there are points in the film where you'll wonder where it's going. And maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's hit him, but I go back to Inglourious Bastards, which is the last one she was involved with, and it was tight as a drum. Most of the films she was involved with were fairly tight. I mean, even Kill Bill 2, which I thought was a little flabby, if you go back and watch it now, it's really not. So there's that. There's also the fact that it seems to lack for plot momentum a lot of the time. Both of us said that we were struggling for where's this actually going. That's fine, but actually, as we did review it, we started identifying the point of lots of things. Why is there a 6-month gap there? Because, and we can explain why there's a 6-month gap there, because the first act, if you like, is about his redemption, recovery, finding himself, finding his self-worth. But then he's got to go off and actually earn that. Sharon Tate's pregnancy needs to grow. There's lots of reasons you do that gap. But on the plus side, it's got its best soundtrack in years. Hateful Eight had a score, which is different. But yeah, it's best soundtrack in years. 2 leading men at the top of their game who are just phenomenally good in this. But the biggest thing to say for this film is, or the biggest couple of things to say for this film is, firstly, it feels like a farewell in that it's just got everyone. There's a couple of examples that aren't there, like there's no Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, if he wanted to do all of his greatest hits, he could have like Pam Grier in there and stuff like that as well. But it's got so many
Christoph
people.
Waltz as well.
Christoph Waltz as well. Yeah, and others. Yeah, but you've got such a big cast full of people that you think you've worked with them before. There are people in the cast where you think, I bet it's because you used to watch them in this, like Timothy Olyphant. Tarantino watched Deadwood. There's no doubt. When you see who Oliphant's playing, you go, yeah, you watched Deadwood and liked it and wanted to do that. The film is full of references to other eras, other films, other filmmakers, other actors, events that happened, songs that happened, TV shows that played. The one detail we forgot in the show is that episode of FBI he was in is a real episode, but the bits that are him spliced in are replacing Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds played that role in that episode.
I did not know that.
I only found that out a day or two ago. I read it somewhere. I think the last thing I really want to say about this film, although I'll respond to stuff Chris says, is I can't get this film out of my head. We're recording on a Tuesday night. I saw it on... Well, actually, we recorded the weekend of last week, didn't we? I saw it...
I think you saw it on a Saturday, didn't you?
So 7, 8, 9, 10... I saw it 10 days ago. I can't get the film out of my head. And that's even after watching RoboCop 3. I can't... Which is, if you want to hear a quality review from us... yeah. I'm still happy to put that, as an aside, I'm happy to put that show out because it's fun and I think you'll enjoy it, but it's the least focused review we've ever done, and that's by our standards, because we didn't know what to say about the film. And Chris was talking to me about different things and I was treating it all as brand new information. I'd watch the film that afternoon, he's going, don't you remember that bit? And then he'd say, what's next? And I'd go, I don't know. The film's gone out of your head, hasn't it? Yeah. Right. So not one of our finest hours, but yeah, I've seen other films. I saw Angel.
In a way, that's kind of the view in itself, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a review, and it's an entertaining show. But actually, as a even remotely professional review, it's lacking. But not to the degree I don't want to put the show out. The show is fine. But since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I've seen Angel Has Fallen. I've seen RoboCop 3. I've seen the RoboCop remake. I'm going to watch that a couple of times because we're recording on that at the weekend. I've seen the new Shaft film. I've seen and about 3 or 4 other things, but that's the things I can think of. And I can't get this film out of my head. This film is just penetrating everything in my mind. It's going through everything else. The music's in my head. The references are in my head. The actors I missed and found out afterwards that were in it are in my head. Not dialogue as in terms of one-liners, because this film doesn't really have a lot of that, but just the way everyone was interacting with each other is in my head. So I think if I had to rank the best, I'm nowhere near able to rank it with the other Tarantino films yet. I mean, I had I can, and I have on the show, but only as a sort of very preliminary, this isn't reliable, but it might end up being amongst my favourite. I think Inglourious Basterds is my favourite Tarantino film. I think it's actually the best Tarantino film as well. With this one, I'm not sure where it lives on best, because it does lack focus and all that sort of thing, but it could live very, very high on favourite. I loved it. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how to feel about it, because I've seen it twice, because on the first time I watched, I just found it really, really boring, largely because there's no plot. I was waiting for ages for the plot to kick in, and I was like, well, where's all this? Where's Tarantino's zippy dialogue gone? Where's all what's happening? Where's the point? Where's it going to pick up? When's the film going to begin? Jesus Christ, Quentin. And by the time you got to the end, you just felt a bit drained and a bit. But
it's exhausting chasing after a film, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that was it. So what I thought, I need to watch it again because we're reviewing it anyway. So I thought, right, I need to at least watch it again. And the second watch is better. As I thought it would be better, because at the very least you kind of you know what's coming. You know what to expect. So any sort of disappointment you have, it's not going to be there this time around. And you might pick up on things that you didn't pick up on that might improve it, whatever. But yeah, I thought it was a better viewing second time round, largely because it was like, okay, well, I'm not chasing after the story, as you said. I'm just like, right, okay, well, I know there isn't much of a plot here, so it's probably not the point. So I just kind of just soaking up the world and the environment and the characters, and I think, okay, well, I can enjoy it as an experience. And I think even while reviewing, even talking through it, I kind of start to liking it a lot more, particularly with in terms of I kind of like realise, actually, hang on, the reason why that I was like being, well, where's that Tarantino type dialogue, is I was actually he wasn't doing that. He was letting his characters do the work, which is what good writers should be doing anyway. So I actually felt like actually that's not really a criticism, Chris. You're just being picky on that one. So yeah, it's actually quite, one of the criticisms Tarantino has is every character sounds like Tarantino. Well, here every character has their own voice. So yeah, it's very much more about soaking up that environment, soaking up that time, kind of like showing the love for TV and film of that time for the actors.
That's what I felt, and I said it on the review that I, another thing with me is I'm fond of this era anyway. As anyone who's listened to lots of me, I'm not a massively nostalgic person, and I've never wanted to live in another era. But if you had to plonk me in another one, this would be fairly high up the list because I think of films, music, some sports, and a few other aspects of this era, and I just think so much of my favourite stuff is around here, and probably for about 4 to 5 years afterwards. If you went from about 67 to maybe 73, 74, that's an era that contains a lot of stuff I love.
So yeah, I mean the stuff about Charles Manson, I'm not too sure. I think probably that's about this reimagining of the death of Hollywood and like having it continue on, probably in this universe is probably what he's trying to do with that. I think, but yeah,
his love is infectious, so it's a different part of my brain that responds to an Inglourious Bastards or whatever. It's all Tarantino. It's all funny. It's all got shops, exchanges in it, bits you didn't expect, little changes of different little stylistic visual ticks as well, little changes to history and so on. So it's very Tarantino, but Inglourious Bastards, I felt like I got the full scope of his mind, and here I feel like he's given us his heart, and that will carry it a long way with me. That's not to say what is one of my favourite films of the year might just have been a masterpiece with a different editor, but it's still going to live as one of my favourites of his films, I think. But we'll see. I've still only seen it once. Unfortunately, I did want to sort of get the second viewing in before we recorded again. But having said that, if I'm confident enough to put my voice to like a nearly 3-hour review of it, then I shouldn't fear talking about it for 10 minutes here. So, yeah, that's what I thought, really.
And so I think that's the lot so far. So, yeah, that's our summer review done.
That's our summer review for this year. Volume 1 is available on YouTube. I've put everything Cinematronics I've been involved with, because obviously that's Chris's podcast somewhere else. It doesn't belong to Do You Expect Us to Talk, but obviously when I'm on it as well, we stick it on the Do You Expect Us to Talk feed as well. So I've put them all in YouTube. So all the volumes of summer reviews going back to 2016 are there. You can also find them on, Chris can tell you where the website is, but you can also find us at facebook.com/expect us to talk, at expect us to talk on Twitter. You can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter as well. Chris,
you can find me at Cinematronics on Twitter. You can also find all the podcast or the episodes on cinematronics.co.uk, and as well as Apple
oranges.
Yeah,
bananas.
oranges. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Or basically just search for it, you'll find it. So there we are. So that was epic. Near about a 4-hour.
But next year they'll make less films to help us out.
Yeah, right. That's not going to happen.
So yeah, now what are we going to be covering next year? Do we know? Not everything, obviously, but there'll be a Godzilla film with King Kong. There'll be a Fast and Furious film. There'll be some Marvel films. Sounds very similar, actually.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, next year on our summer review, we will be covering a Godzilla film, a Fast and Furious film, a James Bond film.
At last.
At last, we'll be covering the Black Widow film.
Birds of Prey, but is that more of a...
That's DC, isn't it? Birds of Prey, yeah. That'll be out.
Is that like later at Top Gun?
Hey, Top Gun 2, we'll be covering that next year. I'll have to learn to love Top Gun before we get there. But, yeah.
Bad Boys 3.
Yeah, okay.
Kingsman.
Kingsman, that's a prequel, I think. Yeah. That's like set the 1800s or something.
So, yeah, okay.
Join us next year for 8 hours.
Yes, in total.
All right.
All right. Well,
good night, folks.
Cheers, and thanks for listening, and do subscribe to Do Expect to Talk if you haven't done already.